Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the wide wooden streets of Edo just before sunrise. When the canals are still and the lanterns have only begun to flicker out, and you find yourself standing in a city that in the early 18th century is already one of the largest in the world. The air smells faintly of damp timber and river mist, and somewhere nearby, a vendor clears his throat like he's rehearsing for a one-man show called Fish at Dawn. You adjust the sleeves of your plain cotton kimono because trust me, you probably won T Survive this day in silk without first earning it tanned. Feel the chill of morning through the thin fabric. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where in the world you're listening from and what your local time is. I love imagining this little sleepy caravan stretched across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in Edo modern-day Tokyo, though nobody here calls it that, yet under the steady rule of the Tokugawa shogunate. A mainstream historical fact floats gently into your half-awake brain. By the 1700s, Edo's population likely exceeds 1 million people, rivaling London and Beijing. It is a wooden metropolis of canals, bridges, and tiled roofs, organized with almost obsessive care. Samurai districts sit neatly apart from merchant quarters, and artisans, like the silk workers you're about to meet, cluster along waterways for easy transport. Urban planning, Tokugawa-style fishmonger, trudges past with 2 buckets dangling from a pole across his shoulders. You try not to make eye contact because you, Haven T, had your rice yet, and he looks far too energetic. In the distance, a watchman claps wooden hyoshiji blocks together, the sharp crack echoing through narrow lanes to signal the changing hour. The sound is strangely soothing, like Edo's version of a notification ping except instead of a text message. It just means congratulations, you're still alive. You begin walking toward the Silk District near the Nihonbashi area, where merchants and craftsmen live cheek by jowl in compact wooden machiya townhouses. The canals beside you carry slow-moving barges stacked with rice bales. Rice, not coins, is the backbone of this economy. Samurai are paid stipends, measured in koku-enough rice, to feed a person for a year. Historians still argue whether this rice-based stipend system stabilized Edo society or quietly strangled it with inefficiencies. But for now, it keeps the hierarchy intact and the ledgers busy. A light glows from an upper window. Inside, someone is already at work. Silk does not wait for late sleepers. You pass under a Norin curtain dyed a soft indigo, the fabric brushing your shoulder like a polite but firm reminder that commerce begins at dawn. The workshop you approach belongs to a guild-affiliated family membership, and a guild is essential here. The Tokugawa authorities strictly regulate production and trade through licensed associations known as Nakam. It keeps quality high in competition, politely restrained. Think of it as capitalism with a very watchful chaperone. You pause at a narrow bridge over a canal. The water reflects streaks of pink and gold as the sun edges higher. Somewhere nearby, mulberry leaves rustle in baskets destined for silkworms that are, at this very moment, chewing with single-minded devotion. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Silkworms are so sensitive that Edo caretakers sometimes avoid strong scents like garlic or smoke near them, believing the worms might become upset and spin inferior cocoons. Imagine telling your boss you can't come in because the worms are emotionally overwhelmed. Surprisingly valid. You step into the lane of the silk quarter. The houses are narrow but deep, built to maximize street frontage for tax purposes because yes, even in sleepy Edo, someone is measuring your fakate. Wooden lattice windows filter the growing light from inside. One workshop comes the faint hiss of water heating. Steam will soon rise from iron pots used to soften cocoons for reeling. You're not there yet, but the day is stretching ahead of you like a bolt of uncut fabric. A woman sweeps the threshold with practiced strokes, bowing slightly as you pass. In Edo's merchant class, appearances matter. Though officially ranked below samurai, wealthy merchants sometimes live quite comfortably. The sumptuary laws forbid merchants from flaunting luxury, yet silk flows through their hands daily. You inhale again. The scent now carries hints of starch and river mud. Somewhere, a kettle whistles. Somewhere else, a child groans about chores, proving that across centuries, mornings are universally unfair. You step carefully over a shallow gutter, mindful of your sandals. Edo streets are tidy compared to many. European cities of the same era point often noted by foreign visitors decades later, but they are still lively, and lively means occasionally squishy. The sky brightens, a temple bell tolls in the distance, low and resonant, rolling across rooftops. For a moment, you feel the scale of this place. 1,000,000 lives unfolding in wooden rooms, behind paper screens. Along these orderly canals, silk is only one thread in Edo's vast tapestry, yet it glimmers with particular importance. Silk garments signal rank, season, taste. They whisper messages about who you are allowed to be. You reach the sliding doors of the guild house just as they open with a soft wooden sigh. The day has begun, and you are about to step inside a world of threads finer than hair rules, stricter than a samurai's posture, and labor so rhythmic it might just lull you into the gentlest kind of historical daydream. Step into the bustling heart of Edo, Japan, where the air hums with ambition, and the rustle of silk is the sound of fortunes being made. We're not just visiting a market, we're entering the inner sanctum of power, the Edo Silk Guild House. Imagine this: a sprawling, elegant building of dark, weathered wood, its tiled roof gleaming under the sun. This isn't just a place of business, it's the nerve center for one of the most lucrative trades of the era. Inside, the world transforms. The scent of polished cypress wood, green tea, and something else. The crisp, clean fragrance of raw silk hangs in the air. Sunlight filters through paper shoshi screens, illuminating dust motes dancing over immaculate tatami mat floors. Here, every sound tells a story. The soft scuff of tabi socks on the mats, the low murmur of negotiations, the distant clatter from the workshops. This is where deals are struck, dynasties are built, and the fate of Japan's most coveted fabric is decided. At the heart of this complex world is the senior merchant. Let's call him Tanaka-san. He's in his late 50s, his face a roadmap of countless seasons of trade. His kimono is understated, but woven from the finest silka silent testament to his status. He moves with a deliberate grace, his eyes missing nothing. He's not just selling silk, he's a master strategist, a keeper of secrets, and a mentor. He knows the subtle differences between silks from Nishijin and Kuru, the preferred colors of a daimyo's wife versus a wealthy actor. His knowledge is his power, and his word is as binding as a shogun's decree. Now, watch closely. A young clerk, perhaps only 16, rushes past. His movements quick but respectful. He carries a stack of ledgers bound in thick paper. His name might be Kenji. He's learning the trade from the ground up, starting with grinding ink, running messages, and memorizing the dizzying array of silk types, patterns, and prices. His mind is a whirlwind of information. The latest shipping costs, the current market value of indigo dye, the complex etiquette of serving tea to a visiting samurai's agent. For him, every day is a test. One mistake could mean disgrace, but success promises a future of wealth and respect. He watches Tanaka-san, hoping one day to possess even a fraction of his master's poise and wisdom. This entire operation is overseen by one figure, the guildmaster. He is the shogun of the silk world. We find him in the main chamber, a spacious room with a view of a serene rock garden. He's older, perhaps in his 70s, with an aura of unshakable authority. He doesn't involve himself in the daily haggling. Instead, he presides over the most critical matters. Today, a heated trade debate is underway. Merchants are gathered, seated in perfect seiza formation on the tatami floor. The air is tense. They're arguing about pricing strategies and new regulations imposed by the shogunate. Should they absorb the new tax or pass it on to the buyers? Should they risk importing a new type of thread from a rival domain? The guildmaster listens, his face unreadable. His final decision will ripple through the entire industry, affecting thousands of lives from the mulberry farmers to the weavers in distant provinces. His role is to maintain balance, ensure the guild's prosperity, and navigate the treacherous political waters of Edo society. But don't for a moment think this was exclusively a man's world. Look over there, in a slightly separate but equally elegant section of the guild house. Here, women merchants conduct their own business. These aren't just wives of merchants. They are formidable traders in their own right, often managing their family's assets, specializing in intricate embroidery or the design of kimono patterns. They negotiate with a quiet but firm confidence, their knowledge of fashion, color, and social trends making them indispensable. In a society with rigid roles, these women carved out a space of economic power and influence, proving that a sharp mind for business was not limited by gender. Their contributions were vital to the guild's success. Suddenly, a different kind of tension fills the room. The inspector from the Bakufu, the shogun's government, has arrived. He's a samurai, his two swords a stark reminder of his authority. He doesn't smile. His job is to enforce regulations, check the quality of goods, and ensure the guild isn't cheating on taxes or weights. He walks through the storerooms, running a bolt of brilliant crimson silk through his fingers, his expert eye searching for any flaw. The merchants bow deeply, their faces polite, masks hiding their anxiety. A negative report from this inspector could lead to crippling fines or even the revocation of their charter. Every transaction, every ledger must be perfect. It's a delicate dance of respect and suspicion, a constant feature of doing business under the watchful eye of the shogunate. Where does the spiritual and the commercial intersect? Just outside the main guild complex, nestled among the trees, stands a small but beautifully maintained Inari shrine. Inari is the kami, the spirit, of rice, sake, and prosperity, and by extension, the patron of merchants. Before a major deal, or after a successful season, merchants like Tanaka-san and even young Kenji will stop here. They clap their hands to summon the kami, bow their heads in prayer, and leave a small offering of rice or sake. The stone fox statues, messengers of Inari, watch over them with an ancient, knowing gaze. This shrine is a reminder that in their world, fortune wasn't just about shrewd calculation, it was also about luck, fate, and maintaining a harmonious relationship with the divine forces that governed their lives. Let's follow the flow of information. A courier, lean and wiry from a life on the road, arrives in a cloud of dust. He's just run the Tokeda Road from Kyoto, carrying urgent messages and precious pattern samples. He bows low, handing a sealed wooden box to a clerk. This is the internet of the Edo period. News of changing tastes in the imperial capital or a blight affecting mulberry trees in a distant province travels at the speed of a runner's legs. This information is gold. The guild that gets it first can adjust its production, corner the market on a new color, and leave its rivals scrambling. The courier, though of low status, is a vital link in this vast commercial chain. Finally, let's venture into the workshop complex behind the main house. The air here is thick with the smell of disindigo, safflower, and madder. Rutand, the rhythmic clatter of looms, fills the space. This is where the magic happens. In one building, workers are carefully reeling raw silk from cocoons submerged in hot water. In another, dyers plunge skeins of thread into bubbling vats, their arms stained with vibrant colors. And in the main weaving hall, dozens of artisans sit at large wooden looms, their hands and feet moving in a complex, mesmerizing dance as they bring intricate patterns to life. Each bolt of silk is the culmination of countless hours of skilled labor, a testament to a tradition passed down through generations. From the young clerk's ambition to the guildmaster's authority. From the intense trade debates on tatami mats to the quiet prayers at the Inari shrine. The Edo Silk Guild was a microcosm of its time. It was a place of incredible artistry, fierce competition, and sophisticated strategy. The stories woven into these silks are not just of flowers and birds, but of the people who dedicated their lives to creating and trading them. Thank you for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into Edo, Japan, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories from history. You follow the assistant up a narrow wooden staircase that creaks politely beneath your weight, as if apologizing for existing. The air grows warmer with each step, and by the time you reach the upper loft, it feels like you've entered a carefully managed summer. This is the Silkworm Room, part nursery, part dining hall, part sacred chamber of very small, very hungry creatures. Rows of shallow wooden trays stretch across low racks, each one lined with mulberry leaves, and there they are, silkworms, thousands of them, pale, segmented, and industriously chewing as though they've signed a collective contract to never stop. The sound is surprisingly audible, a soft, continuous rustling, like gentle rain tapping on paper. It's oddly soothing. If ASMR had existed in the 1700s, this would have been the premium track. 10 hours of dedicated worm snacking. A woman kneels beside one tray, scattering freshly chopped mulberry leaves with deliberate care. Silkworms bombyx mori, as modern science calls them, have been domesticated in East Asia for thousands of years. That's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Silviculture, the cultivation of silkworms, originated in ancient China and spread to Japan centuries before the Edo period, becoming a refined and regionally specialized craft. By Tokugawa times, it's both an art and a carefully guarded industry. You lean closer to observe. The worms are in their larval stage, plump and faintly luminous in the warm light filtering through paper screens. They molt several times before spinning cocoons, shedding their skins in quiet, almost embarrassing transitions. One apprentice carefully removes the discarded skins, maintaining immaculate cleanliness. Hygiene here is not optional. Silkworms are famously sensitive. A sudden drop in temperature, a strong odor, even excessive noise can disrupt their development. In fact, a quirky belief circulates among some Edo caretakers. Pregnant women are discouraged from entering silkworm rooms, not out of cruelty, but from a lingering superstition that strong emotions might confuse the worms and cause uneven spinning. There's no scientific basis, of course, but in a craft so dependent on delicate outcomes, people hedge their bets with ritual caution. Historians still argue whether such practices stem from ancient agricultural folklore or later Edo period anxieties about productivity. Either way, the worms remain blissfully unaware of the debate. You notice how warm the loft feels. Maintaining a stable temperature is essential. In colder months, charcoal braziers carefully heat the space, though never too close to the trays. Smoke would be disastrous. The caretaker explains that ideal conditions allow the worms to feed continuously for weeks before they begin spinning cocoons from a single, astonishingly long filament. One cocoon can contain up to 1 kilometer of silk thread. 1 kilometer from something smaller than your little finger. It's enough to make you reconsider your own daily productivity. An apprentice replaces wilted leaves with fresh ones, moving quickly but gently. The worms lift their tiny heads as if in appreciation or possibly mild judgment. You try not to take it personally. Your modern presence here feels clumsy among such precision. Light streams in from small, high windows, diffused to avoid overheating the trays. Outside, the city hums, but up here, the dominant sound is that soft chewing. You find yourself slowing your breath to match the rhythm. Inhale, rustle, exhale, rustle. It's almost meditative. The life cycle unfolds predictably. After several weeks of feeding, the silkworms will raise their heads and begin spinning cocoons around themselves, encasing their bodies in continuous filament. Timing is critical. If the moth emerges naturally, it breaks the thread into shorter lengths, reducing the silk's value. So cocoons are harvested before emergence, often by gently heating them to preserve the intact filament. The reality is practical, not dramatic. Efficiency over sentiment. You probably won't survive the emotional complexity of 18th century textile economics without a nap. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old, carefully records feeding times on a wooden tablet. Apprentices begin early in Edo workshops, learning discipline alongside technique. Education here is tactile. You feel the weight of leaves, the warmth of air, the subtle shift in worm behavior signaling the next stage. There's no printed manual pinned to the wall. Knowledge travels through observation and repetition. You kneel beside one tray and notice a silkworm lifting its head higher than the rest, swaying slightly as if testing invisible boundaries. Soon, it will attach itself to a twig placed deliberately for this purpose and begin spinning its cocoon in a slow figure-8 motion. The filament emerges from specialized glands, hardening on contact with air. A biological marvel disguised as a noodle with ambition. Some scholars propose that Japan's refinement of sericulture during the Edo period contributed significantly to rural economic stability, allowing farming families to supplement rice cultivation with silk production. Others suggest that the centralized regulations of the Tokugawa state limited innovation. Historians still argue whether Edo's controlled peace nurtured or constrained technological advancement. As you watch the worms chew with unwavering focus, you suspect they would vote for stability. Leaves today, cocoon tomorrow. Simple goals. The caretaker glances at you and smiles faintly, perhaps amused by your fascination. To her, this is routine. She has monitored countless generations of silkworms, each one repeating the same quiet miracle. Outside, merchants debate prices and magistrates stamp documents. Up here, the work is elemental. You brush a stray mulberry leaf from your sleeve and rise carefully. The warmth clings to you as you descend the stairs, carrying with you the gentle rustle of thousands of tiny jaws. Silk, you realize, begins not in grandeur, but in patience, in feeding, in tending, in listening to the softest sounds a city can make. And somewhere behind you, a single silkworm begins its careful spin. Unaware that it is about to become part of someone's shimmering sleeve, step into a world woven from light and shadow, a time when the rustle of a kimono was the sound of luxury itself. We're journeying back to Edo period Japan to uncover the secrets of its most coveted treasure, silk. This isn't just a story about thread. It's a story of artistry, patience, and a tradition that defined an era. Imagine a quiet, steamy room filled with the gentle hum of activity and the earthy scent of boiling cocoons. This was the heart of silk production, a place where nature's tiny miracle was transformed into threads of unparalleled beauty. Before a single thread could be spun, the journey began with the silkworm, the Bombyx mori. These tiny creatures, voracious eaters of mulberry leaves, were the unsung heroes of the entire industry. Farmers tended to them with incredible care, understanding that the quality of the cocoon depended entirely on the health and environment of the worm. It was a delicate balance, a partnership with nature. Once the silkworms had spun their protective homes, the cocoons were harvested. These weren't just any cocoons. They were little vaults of potential, each containing a single continuous filament that could stretch for hundreds of meters. The next stage is where the real magic began, the reeling process, known as zaguri. Picture this: large pots of water gently simmering over a hearth. Women, often from farming families, would sit before these pots for hours on end. Their hands, though calloused from labor, moved with a dancer's grace and a surgeon's precision. They would carefully drop a batch of cocoons into the hot water. This crucial step served two purposes. It softened the serene, the natural gummy protein that holds the cocoon together, and unfortunately, it also ended the life of the pupa inside, ensuring the long filament remained unbroken. With a delicate bamboo tool, or even just their fingertips, the workers would stir the cocoons, searching for the elusive end of the filament. This was a task requiring immense skill and a sensitive touch. Finding that one starting point among a swirling mass of cocoons was like finding a needle in a haystack. Once found, they would gather the filaments from several cocoons, done anywhere from 5 to 10. Depending on the desired thickness of the final thread, this bundle of near-invisible fibers was then guided through a small eyelet and onto a simple hand-cranked reeling frame. Now, imagine the rhythmic motion. One hand steadily turns the crank of the wooden reel, pulling the thread at a consistent speed. The other hand is constantly at work in the hot water, adding new cocoons to the bundle as old ones run out. This had to be done seamlessly, without ever stopping the reeling motion. If the thread became too thick or too thin, the entire length could be ruined. It was a continuous, hypnotic dance of hand and eye, a testament to muscle memory and years of practice. The room would be filled with the soft, rhythmic clicking of the wooden reels and the gentle bubbling of the water. This process, known as zakuriedo, produced a raw silk that was beautifully uneven. Unlike the uniform perfection of modern machine-made silk, Edo period silk had a unique character. It had slubs and variations in thickness that gave the final woven fabric a rich texture and a life of its own. This flaw was celebrated, a signature of human touch. The raw silk, called keto, was then carefully wound into large skeins, glowing with a soft, pearlescent luster. These skeins were the currency of beauty, ready to be sold to dyers and weavers. But the story doesn't end there. The cultural significance of silk was immense. During the Edo period, Japan was largely closed off to the rest of the world. This isolation fostered a unique and highly developed domestic culture. The ruling samurai class, merchants, and even entertainers used clothing to signal their status, wealth, and taste. Sumptuous kimonos, intricate obi sashes, and luxurious textiles were not just garments, they were statements. The demand for high-quality silk was insatiable, driving the industry forward and providing a vital source of income for rural communities. Silk production was more than just a craft. It was a cornerstone of the economy. It connected the countryside, where the silkworms were raised and the thread was reeled, to the bustling cities like Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka, where the master weavers and dyers created their masterpieces. The patterns woven into the silk often depicted scenes from nature, folklore, and poetry, turning each garment into a piece of narrative art. owning a fine silk kimono was a dream for many and a reality for the privileged few. The women who performed this labor were the backbone of the industry. Their work was difficult and their days were long, yet they were masters of their craft. Their contribution, often overlooked in the grand narratives of history, was woven into every inch of silk that adorned the nation's elite. As we look at a piece of antique silk today, perhaps in a museum or a collector's home, it's easy to admire its beauty. But now, we can see beyond the surface. We can see the mulberry farms, the carefully tended silkworms, and the steamy rooms filled with dedicated women. We can hear the gentle click of the reeling frames and feel the immense patience and skill poured into every single thread. Each fiber tells a story of a tradition that valued human touch, embraced the beauty of imperfection, and transformed a humble cocoon into a symbol of enduring elegance. It's a powerful reminder that the most beautiful things in life are often born from simple, rhythmic, and dedicated work. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the world of Japanese silk, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories behind the world's most fascinating crafts. See you next time. The air shifts as you move from steam to pigment. The dye room waits just beyond a sliding partition, and even before you enter, you smell earthy indigo. Faintly metallic mordants, a whisper of something floral and sharp. Compared to the pale gentleness of raw silk, this space feels almost theatrical. If the reeling room is a lullaby, the dye workshop is a low, humming chord. Wooden vats line the walls, some sunk partially into the floor for stability. Cloth covers rest loosely over their surfaces, keeping dust away while allowing air to circulate. A master dyer kneels beside one vat, sleeves rolled, forearms faintly stained blue, despite vigorous washing. You're about to meet color in its most patient form. That's your mainstream historical fact for this stretch of the day. Indigo dyeing, known as ezome, was widespread in Edo period Japan, valued not only for its deep blue tones, but also for its antibacterial properties and resistance to fading. Indigo-dyed garments were common among commoners because bright, luxurious colors like certain purples were restricted by sumptuary laws. Blue, humble, and dignified became the people's color. The dyer lifts the cloth covering one vat and reveals a surface that looks almost alive-a-dark, murky blue with a faint coppery sheen. Indigo fermentation is a delicate biological process. The dye vat must be maintained carefully, fed with lye and organic materials, kept warm but not too warm. It's less a container and more a pet. A slightly temperamental, very blue pet. You lean closer as a length of prepared silk thread is lowered slowly into the vat. The liquid swallows it whole. When it emerges moments later, it appears greenish, almost disappointingly dull. But as oxygen kisses the fibers, the color deepens before your eyes into that iconic indigo blue. It's subtle but magical alchemy performed through chemistry centuries before. Modern lab coats claimed the spotlight. Historians still argue whether Japanese indigo techniques were significantly improved during the Edo period due to internal innovation, or whether they primarily refined earlier methods imported from China and Southeast Asia. The debate ripples gently through academic journals, but here, the dyer watches the thread oxidize with quiet satisfaction. Whatever the origin, the result is beautiful. You notice another vat, this one used for safflower dye. Safflower petals produce beanie, a vivid pinkish red prized for cosmetic and textile use. Extracting the color is labor-intensive and surprisingly inefficient. Vast quantities of petals yield only small amounts of dye. As a result, safflower red can be more expensive than gold by weight in certain contexts. Imagine explaining to someone that your shirt cost a field of flowers and a small fortune. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some Edo dyers believed the temperament of the artisan affected the color outcome. A calm mind produced more even hues, while anger might disturb the dye. There's no chemical basis for this, but when your work depends on timing, temperature, and subtle observation, your mood probably doesn't help. If you're stomping around dramatically, silk prepared for dyeing must first be degummed to remove excess sericin, making it more receptive to color. The fibers are washed and stretched carefully, ensuring even absorption. You run your fingers lightly across a length hung to dry smooth, cool, almost liquid in texture. The transformation from raw filament to dyed thread feels like watching dawn turn into noon. In a corner, small packets of rare pigments are stored in labeled boxes. Some shades, particularly deep purples, are associated with the aristocracy, and strictly regulated sumptuary laws during the Tokugawa period dictated who could wear certain colors and fabrics, reinforcing social hierarchy visually. A merchant may grow wealthy, but he must not outshine a samurai in attire. It's a delicate dance between prosperity and restraint. One apprentice carefully dips a sample thread into a lighter indigo bath, creating subtle tonal variations. Gradation is everything. Edo aesthetics prize nuance over flamboyance. A fabric that looks plain from a distance might reveal intricate shading up close. Understatement becomes a quiet form of sophistication. You watch as dyed silk is rinsed in clear water, the excess pigment swirling away like diluted twilight. The thread glistens under lantern light, deep blue and luminous. The dyer inspects it, nods once, and hangs it on a bamboo rack. The rack resembles a forest of suspended rivers. Outside, a breeze nudges the paper screens, carrying faint street sounds, vendors calling, "Get us sandals" clacking on wood. The city continues its steady pulse, unaware that inside this room, entire social identities are being colored one vat at a time. You consider how something as simple as hue can communicate rank, season, mood, a pale pink for spring, a sober brown for modesty, a bold indigo for durability and quiet pride. Silk absorbs not just dye, but meaning. The dyer covers the vats once more, tucking the cloth carefully into place. The room settles into a fragrant calm. Your fingers carry a faint blue tint now, a souvenir of immersion. And as you step back toward the weaving rooms, where these colored threads will soon meet wooden looms, you realize that silk's journey is not merely about strength or shine, but about the slow, deliberate layering of color onto possibility. The dyed silk dries in soft loops behind you as you step into a quieter chamber lined with hanging sample garments robes, sashes, half-finished kimono panels each, one whispering something about the person who is allowed to wear it. This is where color meets caution, where beauty is carefully measured against the rulebook. A senior merchant unfurls a bolt of deep indigo silk across a low table and gestures for you to sit. The fabric pools like still water. For a townsman, he says simply, the shade is rich, but not ostentatious. It announces prosperity without shouting it from a rooftop. In Edo, that balance is everything. Here comes your mainstream historical fact for this portion of the day. During the Tokugawa period, sumptuary laws strictly regulated clothing by class, limiting who could wear certain fabrics, patterns, and colors. Samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants each occupied a defined social rank, and their wardrobes were expected to reflect it. Silk itself was technically restricted for lower classes in earlier periods, though enforcement varied and softened over time. By the 18th century, prosperous merchants often wore silk discreetly, navigating a polite gray area of compliance. The merchant lifts another sample, this one dyed in a soft persimmon brown, earthy, subtle, perfectly respectable. You begin to understand that fashion here is not about trend, but about signaling. A pattern of small geometric shapes might be acceptable for an artisan, but considered too playful for a senior samurai. A lining of brighter silk hidden beneath a sober exterior becomes a quiet rebellion, known only to the wearer and anyone close enough to notice when sleeves shift. Historians still argue whether these clothing laws were genuinely effective in curbing displays of wealth, or whether they simply fueled more creative forms of expression. As you run your hand over a kimono with an understated exterior and a surprisingly vibrant inner lining, you suspect the latter. Humans, across centuries, are remarkably inventive when told no. A tailor kneels nearby, chalking faint lines onto a length of dyed silk. His shears move with slow precision, slicing the fabric in straight, economical cuts. Traditional kimono construction uses rectangular pieces, minimizing waste and allowing garments to be taken apart and resewn. Nothing is squandered, not thread, not opportunity. On a nearby rack hangs a formal kimono intended for a samurai's wife. The silk shimmers faintly in layered shades of muted plum and gray. The crest of her household will be applied later. You're reminded that, although merchants handled the silk, the upper warrior class still sets the tone for official taste. Edo society is rigidly stratified, yet aesthetically intertwined. A quirky tidbit slips into your awareness as a junior artisan whispers about a recent incident. A wealthy merchant, son wore a robe dyed too boldly for his station, prompting a discreet visit from officials. Rather than confiscating the garment, they reportedly advised him to consider humility. It's a very Edo solution, less dramatic punishment, more pointed suggestion. Fashion police, but with impeccable manners. You examine a pattern book filled with sample motif waves, cranes, bamboo leaves, subtle checks. Certain motifs carry seasonal meaning. Cherry blossoms for spring, maple leaves for autumn. Wearing the wrong seasonal pattern might mark you as careless or out of sync. You suddenly feel grateful. In the corner, two women quietly discuss a commission for a prosperous rice broker. They debate whether a faint woven pattern of flowing water might be too conspicuous. Their conversation is brisk, analytical. You notice again how often women's expertise shapes these decisions, even if official records rarely highlight their names. Outside, a cart rolls past, and the rumble vibrates faintly through the wooden beams. The city is awake now, fully engaged in its daily rhythm. Inside this room, however, deliberation reigns. A kimono is not merely sewn. It is negotiated between desire and decorum, wealth and regulation. You lift a sleeve and hold it toward the light. The silk catches it softly, revealing depth within depth. The outer layer whispers restraint. The inner layer hums with quiet luxury. This duality feels quintessentially Edo order on the surface, complexity beneath. The merchant folds the indigo bolt with deliberate care, aligning edges precisely. Every crease matters. Presentation is part of compliance. A garment that appears too flamboyant risks scrutiny. One that glows subtly might pass unremarked. As you rise, knees protesting in solidarity with centuries of artisans before you, you reflect on how something as delicate as silk can become a tool of governance. Thread becomes hierarchy, dye becomes identity, fabric becomes law. And yet, despite all the rules, despite the watchful eyes of magistrates and guildmasters, creativity persists quiet, layered, patient. Like a bright lining hidden beneath a sober robe, individuality waits for the right moment to shimmer. You step toward the rhythmic clatter echoing faintly from the next room, where dyed and regulated threads will soon cross and interlace on wooden looms, turning policy and pigment into something that moves. The sound reaches you before the sight does a steady wooden clatter, rhythmic and almost musical, like a patient heartbeat amplified through beams and floorboards. You step into the weaving room and are greeted by a row of looms, each one a small architectural marvel of wood, cord, and quiet tension. The air smells faintly of dry timber and newly dyed silk, a crisp contrast to the humid dye vats behind you. A master weaver sits poised at one loom, back straight, feet resting lightly on treadles below. His hands hover near the shuttle, which holds the weft thread. With a gentle press of his foot, petals lift and separate the warp threads, those long, taut strands stretched vertically across the loom. The shuttle glides through the newly opened shed of threads, and with a soft tap of the beater, the weft is pressed into place. Clack, slide, tap, clack, slide, tap. You quickly realize this is less craft project and more wooden orchestra. Every movement is precise. The rhythm is steady enough to lull you, yet complex enough to demand constant attention. That's your mainstream historical fact for this moment. By the Edo period, Japanese weavers had developed sophisticated loom techniques capable of producing intricate patterns, including figured silks and brocades, influenced by both domestic traditions and continental designs. You kneel beside the loom, careful not to disturb the warp threads stretched in immaculate parallel lines. The silk glints faintly in alternating shades of indigo and pale gray. The pattern emerges slowly, almost shyly, like a secret, revealing itself one row at a time. You have to squint to see it at first, a repeating motif of stylized waves. The weaver's foot presses another treadle. The warp threads shift configuration. The shuttle flies through with practiced ease. You resist the urge to applaud after each pass. This is not kabuki theater, after all. It's closer to meditation with wood involved. Historians still argue whether the relative peace of the Tokugawa era allowed for significant technical innovation in weaving, or whether many of the most complex designs were inherited from earlier periods. Watching this loom operate, you suspect both continuity and refinement are at play. Stability may not invent the wheel, but it certainly polishes it. A younger apprentice stands nearby, carefully monitoring thread tension. He adjusts a small wooden peg ever so slightly. Too much tension, and the silk might snap. Too little, and the pattern distorts. The margin for error is narrow. Silk is strong, but it has boundaries much like your patience. If someone were to suddenly start playing drums in here, you notice the weaver's expression calm, almost distant. The repetition has carved familiarity into his movements. Each pass of the shuttle is guided by muscle memory honed over years. You imagine how many hours he has spent in this posture, listening to the same clack and tap. It's a strangely beautiful monotony. In the corner, another loom is set up for a more elaborate design. Additional harnesses hang overhead, allowing for more complex patterning. The warp threads are arranged in subtle color variations, ready to create a design visible only when viewed from the right angle. Edo aesthetics prize this kind of understated intricacy. Nothing too loud, nothing that screams for attention. Even luxury here prefers to whisper. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness as one artisan mentions a superstition. Some weavers avoid beginning a new bolt of silk on an unlucky day in the traditional calendar, believing it might lead to knots or broken threads. Whether coincidence or caution, the practice persists. When your livelihood depends on unbroken continuity, you hedge your cosmic bets. You reach out carefully and touch the finished portion of fabric rolling onto the cloth beam. It feels cool and smooth beneath your fingers, almost liquid in its sheen. The pattern, now clearly visible, resembles rippling water, subtle and dignified. You imagine it sewn into a kimono worn by a merchant, eager to appear modest yet refined. Clothing as coded language. Outside, a distant vendor calls out his wares, the sound drifting through open lattice windows. Inside, the loom continues its steady percussion. Clack, slide, tap. It's not hard to see how someone might drift into a trance here. The repetitive motion, the tactile focus, the soft play of light on silket, all conspires toward calm. The master weaver pauses briefly to inspect the alignment. He leans close, scanning for irregularities. A single misaligned thread can disrupt the entire motif. He adjusts it with a thin bamboo tool, nudging it back into harmony. The correction is small, but essential. Order restored. You notice how the apprentices watch closely, absorbing technique through observation. Formal instruction exists, of course, but much of this knowledge is transmitted through quiet demonstration. A raised eyebrow, a subtle nod, a repositioned hand. Learning here is less lecture, more osmosis. As the morning advances, several looms operate simultaneously, their rhythms overlapping without colliding. It's like a chamber ensemble of wood and silk. You begin to feel the pattern of the day forming around you. Leaf to worm, cocoon to filament, filament to dye, dye to loom. Each step dependent on the last, each motion deliberate. The weaver completes another sequence and shifts slightly, easing tension from his shoulders. You feel a sympathetic ache in your own back just watching him. You probably won't survive a full apprenticeship without a very serious relationship with posture. And yet, there's something profoundly satisfying in seeing threads cross and lock into permanence. What began as soft chewing in a warm loft now becomes structure fabric with weight and presence. Silk, once fragile and floating, now holds its shape. The shuttle glides once more. The pattern deepens. The loom sings on. The looms continue their steady percussion behind you as the scent of something far more persuasive drifts into the weaving room. Warm rice, faintly vinegared pickles, and the comforting steam of miso soup. Even the most disciplined artisan cannot ignore lunchtime forever. The master weaver finishes his current pass, secures the shuttle, and rises with a soft exhale that suggests both satisfaction and relief. You follow the others into a modest side room where low trays have been arranged in tidy rows. The guild house pauses not in chaos, but in choreography. Everyone seems to know exactly where to sit. You kneel carefully, already aware of your knees' growing rebellion, except a wooden tray. On it rests a simple meal, a bowl of white rice, a small dish of tsukemono pickles, a ladle of miso soup with floating cubes of tofu, and a sliver of grilled fish. No extravagance. Edo cuisine values seasonality and restraint, even among prosperous merchants. That's your mainstream historical fact for this midday moment. During the Edo period, urban diets for commoners and artisans were centered on rice, vegetables, fermented foods, and occasional fish, reflecting both availability and Buddhist-influenced culinary traditions. You lift your chopsticks and attempt to look competent. The rice is warm and slightly sticky, the miso broth savory and gentle. Conversation hums quietly around you. Nothing loud, nothing boastful. Lunchtime gossip in Edo tends to be practical. Across from you, two apprentices whisper about a rival workshop rumored to be experimenting with a new weaving pattern inspired by kabuki theater costumes. One rolls his eyes. Too bold, he mutters. Officials won't like it. The other shrugs. Innovation, it seems, is both tempting and risky. Historians still argue whether Edo's strict regulations truly suppressed creativity or whether they unintentionally fueled underground experimentation. Listening to these hushed debates over rice bowls, you sense that artisans often walk a fine line between compliance and quiet ambition. A senior merchant clears his throat and mentions rising mulberry prices in a neighboring province, where their fluctuations have affected harvests. Even silk begins with agriculture, and agriculture bows to the sky. The interconnectedness of everything feels especially clear when you read chewing rice that may have been grown in a distant domain governed by a daimyo you'll never meet. A quirky tidbit emerges as one worker describes a local belief that eating too many pickles could dry out your spirit, making your weaving stiff. No one seems entirely convinced, but the theory circulates anyway. You glance at your pickles with mild suspicion and decide moderation is safest. Laughter ripples softly when an apprentice recounts tripping over a warped thread earlier in the week and nearly unraveling half a day's work. He survived, barely, and so did the silk. The master weaver shakes his head, but allows himself a faint smile. Even in disciplined spaces, small clumsiness is forgiven once. You notice how quickly the meal is eaten. Efficiency carries into nourishment. There's no lingering over courses, no elaborate ceremony here. Tea is poured at the end, simple and green, its steam rising in delicate spirals. The warmth settles into your hands as you cradle the cup. Outside, the city pulses at full volume now. Vendors shout prices. A cartwheel squeaks dramatically as if auditioning for sympathy. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs. Edo is awake and unapologetic about it. A conversation drifts toward taxes and guild obligations. Payments must be made on time. Records must remain impeccable. The Tokugawa administration monitors commerce with a steady gaze. Yet compared to the chaos of earlier centuries, this era's predictability offers comfort. Peace has its paperwork. You sip your tea and feel a pleasant heaviness settle. Ina, post-meal calm that pairs dangerously well with the rhythmic clatter of looms waiting in the next room. If anyone here invented the concept of a power nap, it would be revolutionary. Instead, work resumes promptly. Bowls are stacked neatly. Leftovers are minimal. Waste would be unthinkable. Apprentices wipe trays with damp cloths, movements practiced and efficient. Even cleanup feels rhythmic. Before rising, you overhear one last snippet of gossip. A wealthy townsman reportedly commissioned a kimono lined with a hidden pattern of dancing cranes, visible only when sleeves flutter dramatically. It skirts the boundary of regulation without openly defying it. You suppress a smile. Understatement, once again, with a wink. You place your empty teacup down and straighten carefully, giving your knees a moment of silent encouragement. Around you, artisans adjust sleeves, retie cords, and prepare to return to their stations. Lunch in Edo is less intermission and more recalibration. As you step back toward the weaving room, the looms greet you like patient companions. The rhythm resumes almost immediately. Clack. Slide taps steady as a heartbeat. Rice has been eaten. Gossip exchanged. The day continues. And somewhere in the quiet hum of silk and wood, you begin to feel yourself woven into the pattern to just another thread crossing the steady warp of Edo's measured, meticulous afternoon. The afternoon light slants through the lattice windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. We're back among the looms, but this time, our focus isn't on the masters. It's on the apprentices. They move with a quick, deliberate grace. A rhythm that understands speed without precision is just a creative way to make a mess. Look there, an apprentice, no older than 13, kneels beside a loom. He's carefully rethreading a snapped warp strand. His fingers are nimble, but tight with concentration. The master weaver stands behind him, arms folded loosely inside his sleeves, observing without hovering. The silence stretches, becoming a lesson in itself. And that brings us to a core historical fact about this world. Apprenticeship in Edo, Japan wasn't just a job. It was total immersion. During the Tokugawa period, young artisans, often in their early teens, would enter service and live with their master's household for years. They learned their trade through disciplined practice and constant observation, a commitment often formalized by contracts binding them to loyalty and steady improvement. Watch the boy again. He guides a silk thread through a tiny heedle eye, using a thin bamboo pick. The tip of his tongue peeks out. The master clears his throat softly, not a reprimand, just a reminder to breathe. The boy inhales, his hands steady, and he continues. Patience is the first lesson taught here. Skill comes much, much later. In another corner, a different apprentice is grinding chalk to mark cutting lines on a bolt of dyed silk. His lines are faint, almost invisible. A senior artisan inspects them, gives a single, subtle nod, and moves on. Approval in these workshops is rarely theatrical. You won't hear a booming, fantastic job across the room. A quiet nod carries more weight than applause ever could. This strict hierarchical system is something historians still debate. Did it foster unmatched excellence through repetition, or did it stifle individual creativity? Some scholars argue that the long years of disciplined practice created a level of craftsmanship that's almost impossible to replicate today. Others suggest that innovation might have flourished more in a less rigid environment. Watching this quiet mentorship unfold, you get the sense it did both. The structure provided constraint, but also clarity. Within those boundaries, true mastery could grow. Suddenly, a small mishap. The young apprentice at the loom misjudges the tension. The shuttle catches awkwardly between the warp threads, and the loom makes a sound that can only be described as mildly offended. For a split second, everyone freezes. The master steps forward, examines the snag, and with two deft movements, frees the shuttle. No raised voices, no dramatic sighs, just a silent, swift correction. If you came here expecting a participation trophy for just trying, you wouldn't last very long. Trying is the baseline expectation. Precision is what's required. An older apprentice, maybe nearing the end of his training, supervises the younger ones on simpler tasks. He shows them how to wind thread evenly onto bobbins, maintaining consistent tension. Too loose, he murmurs gently, adjusting a spool. Too tight, it snaps. It sounds like simple textile advice, but it could easily double as a philosophy for life. Over there, a young girl measures a finished bolt of fabric against a wooden rod marked with standard lengths. She records the measurement on a small wax tablet, which will later be transferred to the official ledger. It's a great reminder of how deeply literacy and numeracy were woven into the fabric of daily life and craft. Merchants and artisans in Edo often received a practical education at temple schools called terrakoya. This meant that basic reading, writing, and arithmetic were widespread among the townspeople, contributing to surprisingly high literacy rates for the era. A quirky tidbit surfaces when one apprentice mentions an old superstition. If you drop a shuttle 3 times in a single day, it means someone is thinking ill of your work. Is it cosmic gossip, or just a clever way to encourage carefulness? Either way, it's probably not a theory worth testing. The master weaver returns to his own loom. He begins demonstrating a complex sequence of treadle changes, creating a subtle wave motif in the fabric. The apprentices watch, their eyes locked on his feet. He repeats the sequence slowly, exaggerating the movements just enough for them to see clearly. There are no written diagrams, no manuals. The knowledge here lives in the body. It's passed down through movement. You realize just how much of this learning depends on pure observation. There are no glowing screens, no step-by-step video tutorials, just years and years of watching an expert's hands move and copying those movements until they become your own. An apprentice pauses his work to discreetly stretch his fingers, flexing them behind his back. The work looks gentle, but it's relentless. That kind of fine motor repetition can create an ache that feels almost philosophical. You find yourself flexing your own fingers in sympathy, feeling a small wave of gratitude that you're only visiting this world of intense discipline. The room settles back into its steady rhythm, the clack of the shuttle, the slide of the heddles, the soft tap of the beater bar. Every so often, a soft instruction cuts through the mechanical symphony. Outside, a breeze stirs the Norin curtains hanging in the doorway. The afternoon sun warms the wooden floorboards, and the faint, clean scent of dyed silk hangs in the air. A senior artisan hands a slightly flawed bolt of fabric to an apprentice. "Find it," he says simply. The apprentice scans the surface, his eyes narrowing, searching for the imperfection. It takes him nearly a full minute, but he finally detects a subtle inconsistency in the pattern's alignment. He points it out. The artisan nods. Another quiet victory. Perfection here isn't a single grand achievement. It's incremental, built one tiny correction at a time. You start to understand that apprenticeship in Edo, Japan, was less about speed and more about endurance. It took years to go from student to master, and there's a certain comfort in that slowness. No one expected you to transform overnight. They just expected you to persist, to show up every day and be just a little bit better than you were the day before. As the afternoon deepens, you can see the apprentices moving with a growing confidence. Knots are tied more smoothly. The tension in the threads is adjusted more instinctively. The nervousness you saw earlier has melted away, replaced by the steady assurance of rhythm. And as you sit here among them, listening to this wooden orchestra play its patient song, you understand silk isn't just woven from filament, it's woven from years. It's woven from repetition, from quiet correction, from countless hours of focused effort. The master inspects their work one final time before the next phase of the day begins. The apprentices give a slight bow. There are no speeches, no ceremony, just the quiet acknowledgement of steady progress. The loom resumes its measured clatter, and the young hands move more surely now, crossing threads that will long outlast this fleeting moment of their making. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the world of Edo artisans, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. See you then. The rhythm of the looms softens as late afternoon light stretches long and golden across the workshop floor. A messenger arrives at the entrance, sandals dusty from the street, bowing quickly before presenting a folded document sealed with wax. Business, it seems, never naps. You follow the guildmaster into a smaller side room lined with shelves of ledgers. The air smells faintly of ink and paper dry, orderly, dependable. A low desk holds an inkstone, brushes carefully arranged beside it. The master breaks the seal and scans the message, expression unreadable. This is where silk becomes numbers. That's your mainstream historical fact for this segment. Edo period commerce relied heavily on detailed record keeping, with merchants maintaining meticulous ledgers to track inventory, credit, and payments. Despite the rigid social hierarchy that ranked merchants below samurai, many urban traders became financially powerful through disciplined accounting and regional trade networks. The message concerns a bulk order from a daimyo household, preparing for a seasonal ceremony. Specific lengths, specified shades, delivery within the month. The guildmaster nods once and hands the paper to a clerk, who immediately begins calculating. You kneel beside him as he opens a thick ledger filled with neat vertical columns of brush-written characters, quantities of silk thread produced, bolts dyed, fabric sold, debts outstanding. The numbers flow in elegant lines, far more graceful than your modern spreadsheet, but no less serious. A small tray of silver coins rests near the diskichibu and smaller denominations used for local transactions. Yet rice remains the backbone of wealth in Tokugawa, Japan. Samurai stipends are measured in koku, and merchants often convert between rice value and coin. The exchange rates fluctuate slightly between regions, adding a layer of complexity that would make even modern currency traders sigh gently. Historians still argue whether this dual system writes stipends alongside metallic currency was economically inefficient or cleverly adaptive to Japan's feudal structure. Watching the clerk calculate with calm precision, you suspect Edo merchants simply learned to navigate both worlds with practiced ease. A broker enters quietly, bowing low. He represents a middleman who coordinates deliveries along the Tokeda Road, the vital highway connecting Edo to Kyoto, silk bound for distant domains. Must travel carefully packed to avoid moisture and damage. The broker discusses transport costs, seasonal weather, and the reliability of certain inns along the route. Commerce here extends far beyond the workshop walls. You glance at a wooden abacus resting beside the ledger. The clerk slides beads with swift, confident motions. Click, click, click. The sound is oddly satisfying mathematics with percussion. You try to follow the calculation and quickly decide that you probably 1 tea survive a day as Ito's accountant without serious remedial training. A quirky tidbit surfaces as the broker mentions that some merchants quietly lend money to cash-strapped samurai. Despite official prohibitions against overt displays of financial leverage, the irony is deliciously understated. Those ranked lowest in status sometimes hold the purse strings. Of course, discretion is everything. No one wants to embarrass a warrior with a ledger. The guildmaster considers the order carefully. Production capacity must be balanced against existing commitments. Overpromising would damage reputation. Under-delivering could weaken relationships. He asks about recent mulberry harvests, dye supplies, and apprentice progress. Every element of the silk journey influences the numbers now scratched in ink. Outside, you hear the distant rumble of carts along the canal. A barge pole splashes softly. Ito's economy hums like an enormous loom, threads crossing between rice fields, merchant houses, and samurai estates. The clerk finishes his calculations and reads the totals aloud in a measured tone. The guildmaster nods again and dictates terms for the contract delivery dates, payment structure, and a small contingency for unforeseen disruptions. Fires, storms, earthquakes. This is still a wooden city after all. You notice how calm the negotiation feels. No raised voices, no dramatic bargaining theatrics, just steady discussion, mutual bowing, and careful documentation. Stability remains the priority. As the broker prepares to leave, he mentions rumors of slight silver shortages in another district. The guildmaster's expression tightens almost imperceptibly. Even small fluctuations ripple outward. Silk may shimmer beautifully, but behind it stands a delicate financial web. The contract is sealed. Ink dries. The abacus rests. You sit back on your heels, absorbing the quiet gravity of it all. Every cocoon you saw this morning, every dyed thread, every shuttle pass each, one ultimately resolves into a number written in careful brushstrokes. The guildmaster closes the ledger with deliberate care and offers a final bow. Business for the moment is settled. The workshop beyond resumes its steady rhythm. Unaware war, perhaps, entirely aware that its future rests inside those pages. You rise and follow him back toward the weaving room, where silk continues to take shape. Blissfully indifferent to silver coins and rice stipends, the threads do not worry about exchange rates. They simply cross, interlock, and hold. And as late sunlight warms the wooden beams overhead, you begin to understand that Ito's piece is not accidental lit. It's tallied, measured, and maintained one careful calculation at a time. A faint scent of smoke drifts in through the lattice windows, subtle at first, more suggestion than alarm. You notice it because everyone else does. Heads lift almost in unison, like silkworms, sensing a shift in air. The guildmaster pauses mid-step, listening. In Ito, smoke is never ignored. That's your mainstream historical fact for this portion of the afternoon during the Tokugawa period. Ito was famously vulnerable to fires due to its dense wooden construction, earning it the nickname City of Fires. Major blazes, like the Great Fire of Meraki in 1657, destroyed vast portions of the city and reshaped urban planning afterward. You follow the others outside into the lane. The smoke appears to be rising several streets away, a thin gray ribbon against the late-day sky. Not close enough to panic, but close enough to pay attention. Fire travels quickly through wooden townhouses, paper screens, and lacquered beams. Silk, for all its elegance, is not particularly A watchman hurries past, clacking his wooden hioshigi blocks, sharply far more urgently than at dawn. The sound echoes between buildings, a percussive warning. Buckets appear almost instantly lined along the canal. Ladders lean against walls in practiced readiness. Ito's residents rehearsed for fire the way others rehearse for festivals. Historians still argue whether the frequency of fires in Ito was primarily due to urban density, or whether certain heating and cooking practices exacerbated the risk. Either way, the Tokugawa government established organized firefighting brigades, known as haikushi. Many were composed of commoners and even laborers, forming tightly bonded units recognized by distinctive coats and banners. You spot a group of haikushi rushing down a distant street, carrying hooked poles used to pull down buildings in the path of flames. Counterintuitive, perhaps, but demolition can stop a blaze faster than water alone. It's a sobering reminder that sometimes preservation requires strategic destruction. Inside the workshop, Apprentices move quickly to cover finished silk with protective cloths. Bolts are lifted from racks and stored in chests away from open windows. The efficiency is almost silent. Panic wastes time. Discipline preserves livelihoods. A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind as one artisan mentions that some townspeople believed certain charms or talismans hung above doorways could ward off fire. Tiny wooden plaques inscribed with protective phrases are not uncommon. Whether divine intervention or communal optimism, they offer a sense of reassurance in a flammable world. You stand near the canal, watching as smoke thickens slightly but does not spread toward your district. The breeze shifts mercifully. A few sparks flicker above rooftops in the distance, but the haiku appear to be containing it. Buckets dip into water, passed hand to hand in swift succession. You probably won't survive long in Edo if you read the type to ignore smoke and assume someone else has it handled. Here, vigilance is collective. The guildmaster turns to you and gestures toward a low earthen storehouse built behind the main structure. Unlike the wooden workshop, this kura is constructed with thick plastered walls and heavy doors designed to resist fire. Valuable documents and select silk bolts are stored inside as precaution. The door creaks open, revealing cool dimness within. Even in peaceful times, risk management hums quietly beneath daily routine. After several tense minutes, the smoke begins to thin. Word travels down the lane. The fire has been contained to a small kitchen mishap a few streets over. No widespread damage. A collective exhale moves through the district, subtle but unmistakable. Inside, the apprentices carefully uncover the silken, resume their stations. The looms begin their steady rhythm once more clack slide, tapas, if the interruption were merely a comma in the sentence of the day. Historians still debate whether repeated fire disasters ultimately strengthened Edo's communal bonds or strained its economic resilience. Standing here now, you sense both vulnerability and unity woven into the city's identity. Every resident understands the fragility of wood and paper. Every resident understands the value of preparedness. The guildmaster offers a small nod of gratitude toward the canal, toward the firefighters, toward the fortune of favorable wind. No grand speech, just acknowledgement. You step back inside, the faint scent of smoke lingering like a reminder. Silk catches light once more, unburned and intact. The apprentices settle into rhythm, perhaps slightly more alert than before. As the afternoon continues, you feel the weight of living in a city that could vanish in flame yet persists day after day through vigilance and cooperation. Fire is both threat and teacher here, and as the looms hum gently into the fading light, you realize that in Edo, even danger becomes part of the rhythm-managed, respected, and woven quietly into the fabric of everyday life. The faint scent of smoke fades into memory, replaced once again by the clean, dry fragrance of woven silk. Late afternoon settles over the workshop in amber tones, and attention turns toward preparation rather than production. Finished bolts are inspected one final time before being bundled for travel. Silk, after all, is not meant to linger forever in one district. It has roads to see. You follow an apprentice to a long wooden table where completed fabric is measured, folded, and wrapped in protective paper. Each bolt is aligned with almost ceremonial precision, corners squared, edges smoothed. A strip of recycled silk ties the bundle neatly. No flamboyant bows, just tidy knots. That's your mainstream historical fact for this stretch of the day. During the Edo period, the Tokeda Road served as one of the most important highways in Japan, connecting Edo to Kyoto and facilitating the movement of goods, officials, and travelers under the Tokugawa system of alternate attendance or senkin-katai. Daimyo were required to maintain residences in Edo and travel regularly between domains, generating constant demand for transport and luxury goods like silk. A broker returns, this time accompanied by two porters. They kneel respectfully before lifting the wrapped bundles onto padded frames designed to rest against their backs. The weight is manageable, but not trivial. Silk may feel light in your hands, but commerce has mass. You step outside with them into the cooling street. The canal glimmers softly beside the lane, reflecting the late sun. A barge waits nearby, its flat deck ready to carry cargo downstream before it reaches overland routes. Water transport is often more efficient and less jarring than road travel, important for delicate textiles. Historians still argue whether the senkin-katai system, which required daimyo to travel frequently to Edo, was primarily a strategy to ensure loyalty or a cleverly disguised economic stimulus. Either way, it stimulates everything from innkeeping to silk weaving. As domains compete subtly in presentation, garments matter. The porters secure the bundles beneath a protective cloth on the barge. The broker double-checks the inventory against a small handheld ledger, murmuring figures under his breath. You notice how repetition governs every stage check, recheck, confirm. Silk cannot afford careless accounting. A quirky tidbit surfaces when one porter mentions that certain travelers believe placing a sprig of mulberry leaf inside a cargo bundle brings safe passage, honoring the humble origin of the silk. Whether superstition or sentiment, you notice a small leaf tucked discreetly into one wrapping. Insurance, Edo style. The barge pushes gently away from the canal edge, guided by a long pole. The water ripples in widening circles as it begins its slow journey. You watch until the cargo becomes just another shape among many moving along Edo's waterways. Back inside the workshop, conversation turns briefly to road conditions along the Tokaido. Recent rains may have softened certain stretches. Banditry is rare during the Tokugawa peace, but not entirely mythical. The presence of checkpoints along highways ensures that travelers carry proper documentation. Movement is controlled, deliberate, recorded. You probably won't survive long as an unsanctioned wanderer here. Edo prefers its people traceable. An apprentice rolls up an empty measuring rod and stores it carefully. The day's production tally is updated in the ledger. Outside, shadows lengthen, and lanterns begin to flicker to life one by one along the street. A senior artisan remarks that silk, destined for a daimyo household, must meet even stricter expectations than usual. Not only quality, but timing. Deliver too late, and ceremonies falter. Deliver imperfectly, and reputation suffers. Prestige rides alongside the bundles now drifting along the canal. You pause near the doorway, watching workers sweep the floor in smooth arcs. Tiny threads are gathered and saved. Nothing wasted. Even fragments may find future purpose in smaller textiles. Historians still debate whether Edo's elaborate transport networks strengthened regional cohesion or reinforced the rigid class hierarchy. As silk travels outward from this modest workshop, you sense both forces at play connection and constraint intertwined. The last of the day's bundles are secured. The broker bows deeply before departing to oversee the next stage of transport. His silhouette disappears down the lane, absorbed into the city's steady flow. Inside, the looms fall silent at last. The sudden absence of clatter feels almost startling. You hadn't realized how thoroughly the rhythm had woven itself into your awareness. The guildmaster offers a quiet acknowledgement to the remaining artisans. Production for the day is complete. The threads have been spun, dyed, woven, counted, and dispatched. As dusk settles gently over Edo, you step outside once more, watching the canal darken into reflective ink. Somewhere beyond your sight, silk travels toward distant domains, toward ceremonies, toward sleeves that will move in lantern light. And here in the quiet after labor, you begin to feel the city shifting from commerce to evening its wooden bones creaking softly as it prepares for tea, conversation, and the gentler arts of dusk. The last bundles have drifted away down the canal, and the workshop settles into that peculiar stillness that follows sustained concentration, yet the day is not entirely finished. Just as you begin to imagine stretching your legs beyond recovery, the Norin curtain at the entrance stirs again. Two men step inside, dressed in sober, well-maintained kimono of muted brown and gray. Their posture is upright, their movements economical. At first glance, they appear to be respectable townsmen, but something in the way the apprentices subtly adjust their kneeling posture tells you these are not ordinary customers. Samurai, that's your mainstream historical fact for this moment. During the Edo period, samurai were the ruling warrior class, occupying the highest tier of the rigid social hierarchy, even though many lived on fixed stipends, and were not always wealthy in practical terms. Their status demanded decorum in dress dignified, restrained, and aligned with sumptuary regulations. The guildmaster bows deeply, and you follow suit, careful not to overdo it like an overly enthusiastic folding chair. The samurai return the bow with measured precision. Their garments are elegant but subdued fine silk, undoubtedly, yet dyed in restrained hues appropriate to their station. One of them speaks calmly, requesting fabric suitable for a formal engagement. His tone is polite, but carries quiet authority. The guildmaster presents several bolts of silk, each carefully unfolded just enough to reveal texture and pattern without appearing flamboyant. You kneel nearby, observing the delicate choreography. The samurai runs his fingers lightly over a length of deep indigo woven with an almost invisible geometric motif. Up close, the pattern catches the light. From afar, it appears solid and modest, perfect. Historians still argue whether Edo's prolonged peace eroded the martial identity of the samurai or transformed it into a more bureaucratic and cultural role. Many samurai during this era serve as administrators, scholars, and officials rather than battlefield warriors. Yet their status remains visually encoded in attire. The second samurai clears his throat softly and inquires about lining options. Here is where subtlety becomes art. Linings allow for expression within regulation. The guildmaster produces a sample of pale gray silk with a faint pattern of flowing, water-refined, understated. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness as an apprentice later whispers that some samurai, bound by strict dress codes in public, indulge in slightly more elaborate linings hidden beneath their robes. It's a quiet rebellion of aesthetics. The outside says discipline. The inside hums with personality. The negotiation is brief and respectful. Price is discussed without theatrics. The samurai likely rely on stipends measured in rice, yet practical transactions occur in coin. The guildmaster names a fair sum, a nod signals agreement. You probably won't survive long here if you attempt to haggle aggressively with a member of the warrior class. Subtlety is survival. As measurements are confirmed, the samurai's gaze lingers momentarily on another bolt of shade, slightly richer than regulation might encourage. He pauses, then looks away. Even warriors must navigate boundaries. Outside, lanterns flicker to life along the street, casting warm halos against wooden facades. The day transitions quietly into evening. One of the samurai mentions an upcoming ceremony at his domain's Edo residence. Attendance requires impeccable presentation. In a society where hierarchy is visible at a glance, fabric speaks before words do. Historians still debate whether sumptuary laws truly maintained class distinctions, or whether economic realities blurred lines, more than officials admitted. Watching this exchange, you sense that while wealth and status may not always align perfectly, appearances remain meticulously curated. The bolts are refolded with care, selected silk set aside for tailoring. The samurai rise smoothly, offering a final bow. Their sandals click softly against the threshold as they depart into the lantern-lit lane. Inside, the apprentices exhale almost imperceptibly. Not fear-just awareness. Serving high-status clients carries weight. The guildmaster inspects the reserved fabric once more, smoothing it thoughtfully. Silk, destined for a samurai's sleeve, must embody restraint, dignity, and quiet strength. You glance at the door where the warriors vanished into the growing dusk. In this peaceful era, swords rarely leave their scabbards, yet hierarchy remains sharp. The workshop dims as lanterns are lit indoors. The day's labor has woven threads for merchants and warriors alike. Silk, impartial and luminous, moves fluidly between classes, even when people cannot. And as evening deepens, you sense the city shifting once more from structured transactions to softer gatherings. The steady clatter of looms has given way to the promise of tea steam rising under paper lanterns. You adjust your sleeves and step back toward the street, ready to follow the glow of evening into Edo's quieter, more conversational hours. Lantern light spills across the street like warm honey, catching the edges of roof tiles and the gentle curve of the canal. The workday has loosened its grip, and Edo exhales. You step away from the workshop, sandals brushing against the smooth, packed earth. Following the steady trickle of townspeople drifting toward tea houses, the air changes as you walk. The crisp scent of silk and dye gives way to charcoal smoke, simmering broth, and that faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts sold from a nearby stall. Vendors call softly, not aggressively. This is evening commerce, unhurried and mellow. You probably won't survive long here if you expect neon signs and loud music. Edo nightlife is more lantern glow than nightclub glow stick. Ahead, a modest tea house beckons. Its Norin curtain sways gently, painted with a simple emblema stylized plum blossom. You duck beneath it, stepping into a space warm with low conversation and the gentle scrape of ceramic against wood. Here, as your mainstream historical fact for this moment. Tea houses in Edo period Japan served as important social hubs, particularly for the chunin or townspeople class. They were places for conversation, light refreshments, business negotiations, and sometimes artistic performances. While not all tea houses were linked to the pleasure quarters, many existed as respectable spaces for community gathering. Inside, tatami mats cushion your steps, a server kneels gracefully, offering a quiet greeting. You're shown to a low table near the wall, where a paper lantern casts a soft amber circle. Steam curls upward from a kettle in the corner. You sit, legs folded beneath you, and try to look like someone who has been sitting on tatami their entire life. Your knees quietly file a complaint. The server brings a small ceramic cup and pours green tea in a steady stream. The liquid glows faintly in the lantern light. You lift it carefully, inhaling the grassy aroma. Across the room, a pair of merchants discuss shipments in hushed tones. Even here, commerce lingers. Silk bolts you watched depart earlier may soon be topics of similar conversation. Historians still argue whether the rise of urban leisure spaces like tea houses subtly shifted power dynamics within Edo society. While samurai maintained formal authority, the economic and cultural influence of townspeople grew steadily in places like this over tea rather than swords. A musician enters quietly, carrying a mason. She kneels at the front of the room and begins to pluck soft, measured notes. The sound is intimate, resonant, slightly melancholy. Conversation lowers instinctively. You sip your tea and let the music wash over you. The rhythm is unhurried, almost hypnotic. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness as someone mentions that certain tea houses were known for keeping notebooks of regular customers, preferences, favorite teas, preferred sweets, even favorite seating spots. Edo hospitality had memory long before loyalty cards. A plate arrives at your table, small rice crackers brushed with soy glaze. You nibble cautiously. The crackle is satisfyingly delicate. You resist the urge to ask for dipping sauce like you're at a modern cafe. In one corner, a group of apprentices from another trade laugh softly over shared stories. Their sleeves are slightly ink-stained, suggesting scribes or printers. Edo is alive with professions beyond silkwood block artists, papermakers, carpenters. The shamisen melody shifts, becoming lighter. A gentle joke woven into song lyrics prompts a ripple of amused murmurs from the audience. Humor here is subtle, a raised eyebrow rather than a punchline. You notice how layered the room feels, merchants, artisans, perhaps a low-ranking samurai blending quietly among them. Though social hierarchy remains intact, spaces like this allow proximity without disruption. Historians still debate how rigid class boundaries truly were in daily urban life. Officially strict, practically nuanced. The server returns to refill your cup without being summoned, her movements fluid and nearly silent. Steam rises again, carrying warmth to your face. Outside, you hear distant footsteps on wooden bridges crossing the canal. The city hums softly, like a contented instrument tuning itself for the night. You lean slightly closer to the lantern, watching its flame tremble behind paper walls. The light casts elongated shadows that ripple with every subtle movement in the room. A man at the next table remarks on the quality of silk he purchased earlier. You recognize the workshop's handiwork described in admiring tones. The city is small in its interconnections. You smile quietly into your tea. Threads you watched woven at dawn are now part of evening conversation. The shamisen slows, notes stretching longer between plucks. The musician's fingers move with practiced ease. For a moment, time feels suspended. No urgent transactions, no clatter of looms, just tea, music, lantern light. And you realize that Edo's rhythm is not merely about production and hierarchy. It is about transition work to leisure, daylight to dusk, structure to softness. You lift your cup one more time, feeling its warmth seep into your palms. The city outside continues its gentle murmur. And inside this tea house, the world narrows to steam, string, and quiet companionship. He uses it to punctuate a story he's telling, snapping it open dramatically at a key moment. Somewhere else, samurai are contemplating their upcoming ceremonies. And right here, within this soft circle of lantern light, Edo is gathering itself not to rest completely, but to ease into its quieter hours. I lift my cup for one final sip, feeling the warmth spread gently through my chest as the music fades into a lingering, peaceful hush. Thanks for joining me on this little trip back in time. Follow 4 more journeys like this. The last notes of the shamisen dissolve into a comfortable hush, and for a moment no one rushes to fill the silence. The tea house seems content to let the quiet stretch like silk drawn slowly across a loom. A few patrons bow and rise, their sandals whispering against the threshold as they step back into the lantern-lit street. You remain seated, watching the proprietor trim the wick of a lantern with small metal scissors. The flame steadies, casting a softer glow. Night has settled fully now. Edo hums beyond the paper walls in a lower register. Eventually, you unfold yourself from the tatami with the cautious dignity of someone pretending their legs are not, tingling like an overexcited shamisen string. A polite bow, a few coins placed neatly on the tray, and you slip back outside. The canal reflects the moon in broken fragments. Bridges arch gently overhead, their wooden planks worn smooth by decades of sandals. Somewhere in the distance you hear the faint clack of a night watchman. Hayoshiji wooden clappers struck together to signal the hour and warn against fire. That's your mainstream historical fact for this hour. Fire was a constant threat in Edo, a city built largely of wood and paper. Night watchmen patrolled neighborhoods, sounding clappers and calling reminders to extinguish flames. Large fires, known as Flowers of Edo, were tragically common throughout the period. You probably won't survive long here if you treat candles like decorative suggestions. As you walk, you notice narrow side streets branching away from the main thoroughfare. Some glow with modest lanterns, others retreat into shadow. The city at night feels both intimate and expansive. A pair of apprentices hurry past you, laughing softly, likely returning to shared lodgings. Their sleeves brush against yours in passing, and you catch the faint scent of ink. Perhaps printers heading home after trimming woodblocks for tomorrow's impressions. Historians still argue whether Edo's strict curfews were consistently enforced or flexibly applied, depending on neighborhood and status. Officially, gates and checkpoints regulated movement after certain hours. Practically, life in a city of over 1 million people required nuance. You pass a small shrine tucked between buildings, its stone fox statues illuminated by a single candle. Someone has left a tiny offering of rice. Even in the commercial heart of the city, spiritual rhythms continue quietly. A quirky tidbit lingers in your mind. Some neighborhoods employed professional water bearers, who specialized in maintaining readiness against fires, storing buckets and ladders at strategic points. In a wooden metropolis, preparedness was not optional, it was communal. The canal widens slightly ahead, where a small cluster of boats rests moored for the night. Their silhouettes sway gently, ropes creaking in soft protest. Earlier, silk bundles drifted along this very waterway. Now it lies calm, reflective. You pause on a bridge, leaning lightly against its railing. The moon casts silver across the ripples. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then settles. You think of the workshop's steady looms, the samurai's measured selection of fabric, the tea house's low music. Edo is not simply a city of commerce. It is choreography, a patrol of firemen machibakasis in the distance, identifiable by their distinctive coats. During fires, these brigades were known for climbing onto rooftops and even dismantling structures to create fire breaks. Courage mixed with strategy. Historians still debate whether the frequent fires shaped Edo's architectural culture more profoundly than political edicts did. The city rebuilt itself repeatedly, perhaps fostering a certain acceptance of impermanence. You resume walking, sandals tapping rhythmically against wooden planks. A small stall remains open, selling skewered dumplings brushed with sweet soy glaze. The vendor fans the charcoal gently, sparks rising like fleeting stars. You consider stopping, then remember you've already sampled rice crackers and mochi tonight. Moderation feels wisest, especially when sitting cross-legged is still a challenge. A faint breeze carries the scent of the river and distant cooking fires. Paper lanterns sway overhead, their light trembling slightly with each gust. As you near the residential quarter connected to the silk workshop, the streets grow quieter, doors slide shut, laughter fades into murmurs. Behind walls, you notice a neighbor, carefully placing a wooden bucket of water near his entrance. Another small precaution against fire. Habit layered upon habit. The Hayoshiji clappers sound again, marking the passage of time. The watchman's voice follows calm but firm, reminding residents to mind their flames. You probably won't survive long here if you ignore communal responsibility. Edo thrives on shared vigilance. The workshop comes into view, its facade darkened now, except for a single lantern near the entrance. Inside, apprentices likely prepare sleeping spaces, rolling out futons on tatami floors once occupied by looms and tables. You pause before entering, glancing back at the canal. The moonlight shimmers across its surface, a pale ribbon threading through the city. Today you have walked through silk, dust, and tea steam, through hierarchy and hospitality. And now, as night deepens, Edo settles not silent, but softened. You slide the door open quietly, stepping inside to join the city's slower breathing. Inside the workshop, the transformation is almost magical, where looms clattered and apprentices darted earlier. Now, futons unfurl across tatami like pale clouds settling over a field. Wooden tools are stacked neatly against the wall, shuttles resting side by side as though they too require sleep. A single lantern burns low near the entrance, its glow soft and amber. The air carries a faint mixture of straw matting and lingering silk fibers, a clean, dry scent with the slightest hint of dye. You remove your sandals and step carefully onto the tatami. An apprentice nods in greeting, already kneeling beside a folded futon. Living quarters and workplace coexist here with efficient practicality. Space in Edo is precious, especially within artisan districts. Here, your mainstream historical fact for this quieter hour. Many urban artisans in Edo both worked and lived in the same buildings. Shop fronts opened onto busy streets during the day, while upper floors or rear rooms served as family or communal sleeping areas at night. Compact design met economic necessity. You probably won't survive long here if you require a king-sized mattress and 3 decorative pillows. The apprentices speak in low tones as they arrange bedding. Futons are laid out in tidy rows, leaving narrow walking paths between them. A small brazier sits safely contained near the wall, its embers glowing faintly. Fire precautions never fully disappear. One of the younger workers carefully folds the gilt ledger and places it in a wooden box before sliding the lid shut. Even numbers must rest. You settle onto a futon, testing its firmness. It yields gently, not luxuriously. A folded kimono serves as a pillow. You adjust it once, then again, attempting the art of comfort without complaint. Across the room, a senior artisan recounts a brief story from his youth, how he once traveled part-way along the Tokeda Road to deliver silk personally to a merchant in Kyoto. The apprentices listen with half-closed eyes, imagining distant post towns and roadside inns. Historians still argue whether artisans who traveled beyond their neighborhoods experienced significant social mobility or remained largely confined by guild structures. Mobility in Edo existed, but within carefully managed boundaries. A quirky tidbit drifts through the dim light as someone mentions that certain guilds once imposed small fines on members who overslept and delayed morning production. Time, like silk, required disciplined handling. Soft laughter ripples through the room before fading into yawns. Outside, the Hayoshiji clappers echo faintly once more. The city's nighttime rhythm slows further. Somewhere beyond the workshop walls, a boat rope creaks against wood. You roll onto your side, watching the lantern flame flicker gently. Shadows of wooden beams stretch overhead like quiet ribs protecting the room. One apprentice whispers about the samurai who visited earlier. He wonders whether warriors truly miss battle in this era of prolonged peace. Another shrugs, murmuring that silk pays more reliably than swords these days. Historians still debate how deeply the Tokugawa peace reshaped warrior identity. Some argue that samurai embraced scholarly pursuits. Others suggest an undercurrent of restlessness remained. From your futon vantage point, the debate feels distant, softened by sleepiness. A faint draft brushes across your face as someone slides a window panel slightly open for ventilation. Cool night air mingles with the warm interior, creating a gentle balance. You probably won't survive long here if you expect complete silence. Edo at night hums, quietly timbers, settling distant footsteps, the occasional murmur from neighboring buildings. Gradually, conversation dissolves into soft breathing. One by one, the apprentices drift into sleep. The brazier's glow dims further. You let your thoughts wander back through the day. Mulberry leaves feeding silkworms, dye vats releasing steam, samurai fingers testing indigo silk, tea steam rising in lantern light. Each image drifts past like a slow-moving barge along the canal. The workshop feels different now, no longer a place of productivity but of shared rest. Tools wait patiently for dawn. A final lantern adjustment lowers the room into deeper shadow. Only a faint halo remains near the doorway. Your eyelids grow heavier. Outside, Edo continues its subdued murmur water against wood. Distant watch calls, the soft exhale of a million lives settling simultaneously. Silk, you realize, begins and ends in quiet. From cocoon to loom to sleeve, it carries with it a kind of hush. You draw the thin blanket slightly closer, nestling into the tatami's faintly grassy scent. And as the night deepens around you, the workshop breathes in unison looms at rest, ledgers closed. Lantern dimmed waiting patiently for another dawn to thread its way through paper windows. A faint gray light presses gently against the paper windows long before anyone speaks. Dawn in Edo does not burst its seeps. You sense it first as a thinning of darkness, then as the subtle redefinition of beams and ceiling lines above you. Someone stirs. Fabric rustles. A quiet throat clears. You open your eyes to the pale wash of early morning filtering through shoshi screens. The lantern has long since gone out, and the brazier's embers sit cold and harmless. The workshop, only hours ago a dormitory of soft breathing, begins its return to industry. One apprentice rises with careful efficiency, folding his futon into precise thirds before sliding it into a wooden cupboard. Others follow, movements subdued but practiced within minutes. The sleeping field disappears, replaced by open floor space ready for looms and measuring tables. Here, your mainstream historical fact for this new day. Edo operated on a temporal system, often divided into 6 daytime and 6 nighttime segments, adjusted seasonally according to the length of daylight. Timekeeping was less about exact minutes and more about natural rhythms: sunrise, sunset, bells, and watch calls. You probably won't survive long here if you insist on checking a wristwatch every 10 minutes. The sun is your supervisor now. The sliding door opens briefly, admitting a breath of cool air and the distant scent of river water. A vendor's call echoes faintly down the lane. Fresh tofu delivered at first light. A kettle is set over a modest flame, and soon the soft whisper of heating water joins the awakening room. Tea will precede labor. As always, you sit up and begin folding your own bedding, attempting to match the neatness of those around you. The tatami beneath you retains a faint impression of warmth from the night. Outside, the sky lightens towards soft peach. A rooster crows somewhere beyond the immediate district, though in a city of this size, it sounds almost symbolic rather than agricultural. Historians still argue whether urban Edo residents felt deeply connected to seasonal cycles despite living in a dense metropolis. Some scholars suggest that festivals, market rhythms, and food availability kept seasonal awareness alive, even amid crowded streets. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Certain neighborhoods rang bells at sunrise not only to mark time, but to remind shopkeepers to open shutters promptly. A subtle nudge from community to commerce. The apprentices move with increasing alertness now. Loom components are repositioned, tools retrieved from their resting places. The wooden frames seem almost eager, like instruments waiting for a conductor. The guildmaster enters from a rear room, already dressed and composed. He offers a brief nod of acknowledgement. There is no rousing speech. Dawn requires action, not rhetoric. Tea is poured into small cups and passed around. You cradle yours between both hands, letting warmth seep into fingers, still adjusting to the morning chill. Through the open doorway, you glimpse neighbors sweeping the street in gentle arcs. Dust rises briefly before settling again. Cleanliness is not merely aesthetic, it reflects order. You probably won't survive long here if you leave yesterday's mess lingering into today. Ito forgives little in the way of sloppiness. A young apprentice fetches a basket of mulberry leaves delivered just after dawn. The silkworm trays, kept in an upper loft, require fresh feeding. You follow him up a narrow ladder, emerging into a space alive with soft, steady chewing. Thousands of tiny mandibles work in unison. It sounds like a faint rain shower on distant rooftops. That steady consumption is the quiet engine of the entire enterprise. Without mulberry leaves, no cocoons. Without cocoons, no silk. Without silk, no bolts wrapped for cicada. Historians still debate whether urban culture-raising silkworms within city districts was common or primarily rural. Evidence suggests a mix, with some stages occurring close to workshops like this. The apprentice spreads fresh leaves carefully across trays. The silkworms respond immediately, lifting pale heads and resuming their methodical work. Back downstairs, the first loom is tested. A shuttle slides experimentally across warp threads. The sound is tentative at first, like a throat clearing before song. Light strengthens through the shoshi screens, transforming the workshop from shadowed shelter into bright workspace. Dust motes drift lazily in golden beams. You take your place near a loom, fingers brushing against taut threads. The day begins not with urgency, but with steady repetition. Outside, the canal reflects the morning sky in pale ripples. A barge glides silently past, its cargo indistinct in the early light. The guildmaster checks the ledger once more, confirming yesterday's dispatch and today's goals. Production resumes with measured confidence. You inhale the mingled scents of straw, wood, and faint dye. Yesterday's tea steam has faded, replaced by fresh morning air. And as the first full shuttle pass rings clearly through the room, Ito awakens fully threads, tightening, leaves rustling, shutters lifting along the lane. Another day begins, seamless as silk drawn from cocoon to loom, from dawn to dusk. The day begins not with the sun, but with a sound, a gentle, rhythmic clatter that has echoed through this valley for centuries. This is the sound of silk being born. Welcome to the Nishijin district of Kyoto, where we're stepping into a world where time seems to slow down, a traditional silk weaving workshop. The air here is thick with the scent of raw silk and seasoned wood. Light streams through the paper shoshi screens, illuminating countless threads, each one finer than a human hair, shimmering like a captured rainbow. This isn't just a factory, it's a sanctuary of craft, where every single day is a testament to an art form perfected over 1,000 years. The first task of the morning is preparing the loom. It's an immense, intricate machine, a wooden giant that looks more like a complex musical instrument than a tool for weaving. The master weaver Tanaka-san moves with a grace that belies his 70 years. His hands, gnarled and stained with dye, know every inch of this loom. He checks the tension of the warp threads, thousands of them stretched taut, forming the canvas for the masterpiece to come. He explains that a single kimono obi, the wide sash worn with a kimono, can contain over 20,000 individual silk threads. It's a number that's hard to even imagine. Did you know that silk production, or sericulture, was a closely guarded secret in ancient China for almost 3,000 years? Legend has it that the secret was smuggled out of China by a princess who hid silkworm eggs in her elaborate hairstyle. When it finally arrived in Japan around the 3rd century, it was considered more valuable than gold. It was the fabric of emperors, aristocrats, and high-ranking samurai. Looking at the lustrous sheen of the threads being prepared today, you can understand why. It has a life to it, a depth that synthetic fibers just can't replicate. Now, the weaving begins. Tanaka-san sits at the loom, and the workshop's heartbeat starts. The rhythmic asterisk shuttle dash thump, shuttle thump asterisk of the heddles lifting, and the shuttle flying back and forth is hypnotic. It's a dance between man and machine, a language spoken without words. Each pass of the shuttle lays down a single weft thread, and with infinitesimal slowness, a pattern begins to emerge. Today, it's a design of cranes flying over waves, a classic symbol of longevity and good fortune. Tanaka-san's feet work the pedals below, controlling which threads are lifted, while his hands guide the shuttle with unerring precision. He says his mind goes quiet when he weaves. It's a form of meditation, a state of mushin, or nomend, where the body simply knows what to do. But he isn't alone. In the corner, a younger apprentice, Yumi-san, is painstakingly winding silk onto bobbins. Her task is just as crucial. If the thread is wound too tightly or too loosely, it will break on the loom, ruining hours of work. There's a quiet camaraderie between them. He'll occasionally call out a piece of advice without looking up from his work, and she responds with a respectful hi. It's a silent passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. This isn't a job you learn from a book. It's an inheritance absorbed through years of observation, practice, and patience. Yumi-san tells me she's been an apprentice for 5 years and still feels like she's just scratching the surface. She says the hardest part was learning to feel the thread, to understand its personality, its strengths and weaknesses. At midday, the clatter stops. It's time for lunch. We sit on tatami mats in a small adjoining room, sipping green tea and eating simple bento boxes. This is when the stories come out. Tanaka-san talks about his grandfather, who wove fabrics for the imperial household. He pulls out a small, faded swatch of silk. The colors are still vibrant, a breathtaking pattern of chrysanthemums and cherry blossoms. He says this piece is over 100 years old. Holding it is like holding a piece of history. The craftsmanship is almost unbelievable. He explains that in the old days, some patterns were so complex that a weaver might only complete a few centimeters in an entire day. It puts the value of a handcrafted kimono, which can take months or even a year to create, into perspective. Even in this bubble of tradition, the outside world finds its way in. A delivery person arrives with a new batch of raw silk cocoons from a farm in Gunma Prefecture. Tanaka-san inspects them carefully, holding them up to the light. The quality of the cocoon determines the quality of the final fabric. He explains that the best silk comes from silkworms fed a very specific diet of mulberry leaves. It's a connection to nature, to the seasons, and to the farmers who are the first step in this long, intricate process. A smartphone buzzes on a nearby table. Yumi-san checks a message. It's a reminder that while the craft is ancient, the people practicing it live in the 21st century. They use social media to showcase their work and connect with customers from all over the world. Breathing new life and global appreciation into this age-old art, the afternoon light softens, casting long shadows across the workshop. The rhythm of the loom continues, steady and unwavering. The pattern of the cranes is more defined now. You can see the delicate feathers on their wings, the crests on their heads. It's magic, watching a story unfold thread by thread. Tanaka-san doesn't seem tired. He seems energized by the work. His focus absolute. He says that each piece he creates carries a part of his spirit. When someone wears an obi he has woven, they are wearing a piece of his life, a piece of Nishijin's history. It's a deeply personal connection between the creator and the wearer, something that's lost in the world of fast fashion. As the sun begins to set, the work winds down. The loom is quieted, covered with a soft cloth to protect the delicate threads from the evening dust. Yumi-san carefully sweeps the floor, collecting fallen snippets of silk thread. Nothing is wasted here. Even these scraps can be spun into a rougher type of silk called sumugi. It's a philosophy of respect for the material, for the labor, and for the silkworms that gave their lives to create this incredible fiber. Leaving the workshop, the silence of the evening feels profound after a day filled with the rhythmic pulse of the loom. The sound still echoes in my ears. A day here is more than just watching something being made. It's witnessing a living tradition, a quiet but powerful rebellion against a world that values speed over substance. It's a reminder that some things are worth taking the time to do right, that beauty can be found in patience, and that the most enduring things are created one thread at a time. This is the soul of Japanese craftsmanship, woven into every inch of silk. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the world of Japanese silk weaving. If you found this as fascinating as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations of traditional arts. See you in the next one. By late morning, the light has sharpened. It no longer slips gently through the shoshi screens. It presses in with quiet authority, illuminating every stray fiber and uneven edge. The workshop feels warmer now, the air slightly thicker with the scent of silk and sun-warmed wood. The looms continue their measured chorus. Clack, slide, tighten. Clack, slide, tighten. Your shoulders have found the rhythm, moving almost without instruction. Repetition becomes meditation. You probably won't survive long here if you crave constant novelty. Edo craftsmanship thrives on doing the same thing beautifully thousands of times. A pause ripples through the room as the guildmaster announces a short midday break. Not a dramatic halt, just a gentle easing. Shuttles are set down, threads secured, shoulders rolled discreetly. Lunch emerges from wrapped cloth bundles brought from home or purchased earlier. Rice balls, pickled vegetables, perhaps a sliver of grilled fish, if fortune smiles. You unwrap a simple onigiri, the rice slightly warm from its cloth cocoon. Here asks your mainstream historical fact for this midday moment. Rice was the staple of the Edo diet and also functioned as a unit of wealth. Samurai stipends were often measured in koku, a quantity of rice theoretically sufficient to feed one person for a year. Rice was currency as much as sustenance. You take a bite, savoring the plain steadiness of it. No elaborate sauces, no garnished theatrics, just sustenance for steady hands. Across from you, an apprentice shares a bit of salted plum, offering it with quiet generosity. The sourness cuts through the rice's softness. Conversation drifts, lightly weather predictions, festival rumors, a mention of rising mulberry leaf prices in certain districts. Even lunch carries economic undertones. Historians still argue whether inflation during parts of the Edo period significantly strained artisan households or whether stable. Governance kept economic shocks manageable. Merchant records suggest fluctuations, but life here appears steady, if not lavish. A quirky tidbit surfaces when someone recounts that certain urban legends claimed silk, woven on particularly hot days, shimmered more brightly because the sun lent its spirit to the threads. No empirical data supports this theory, but it makes for pleasant lunchtime speculation. You glance toward the ladder leading to the silkworm loft. The soft chewing continues overhead, a persistent reminder that production begins far above the loom. Outside, footsteps slow in the midday heat. Vendors call less energetically. Even the canal seems to move languidly under the strengthening sun. You probably won't survive long here if you expect air conditioning. A folded fan becomes your most loyal companion. An apprentice produces a sensu folding fan decorated with a painted carp. He snaps it open gently, creating a faint breeze. Others follow suit, a synchronized fluttering of paper and bamboo. The guildmaster finishes his rice quietly and wipes his hands on a cloth. He scans the workshop with calm assessment, not scrutinizing, merely observing. Productivity will resume shortly. In the distance, a temple bell sounds once, its tone deep and resonant. The vibration seems to settle dust motes mid-air. Historians still debate how much temple institutions influenced daily urban rhythms versus commercial pressures. Bells mark time, but so do ledgers and delivery schedules. Lunch wraps are folded neatly, crumbs brushed away. Even rest is conducted with order. You rise, stretching subtly, then return to your loom. Threads wait patiently, unchanged by your brief absence. The shuttle resumes its path. The rhythm returns almost instantly, as if it had only paused to inhale. Sunlight now casts sharper angles across the floor. The heat encourages slower, deliberate movements rather than rushed gestures. Sweat gathers lightly at your neck, absorbed by cotton underlayers. The apprentice hummer resumes his low vibration, and you cannot help noticing how seamlessly it blends with the loom's cadence. Outside, a child laughs somewhere down the lane before being gently hushed. Life continues in layers beyond this room. You focus on the emerging pattern beneath your fingers. Each pass of the shuttle tightens the design, binding weft to warp in quiet cooperation. And as midday stretches toward afternoon, Edo hums steadily fed by rice, shaded by paper screens, sustained by repetition that turns humble threads into something luminous. The afternoon arrives not with a grand announcement, but with a subtle shift in the light. The sun tilts westward, and its rays enter the workshop at a new angle, casting longer bars of gold across the tatami mats. The air feels heavier now, warm and thick, and even the steady rhythm of the loom seems to have slowed down, as if time itself has decided to take a rest. You guide the shuttle through another pass, noticing how your movements have become more efficient over the hours. There are fewer wasted gestures, less conscious thought. You've learned that silk responds best to consistency. You probably wouldn't survive long here if you relied only on sudden bursts of inspiration. Edo craftsmanship rewards patient endurance far more than fleeting excitement. Suddenly, a soft knock at the door interrupts the loom's cadence. The Norrin curtain parts, and a traveling peddler appears, carrying a large wooden case strapped to his back. He bows politely, asking for just a moment to rest in the shade. The guildmaster simply nods, granting this small act of hospitality. This was a common sight. Edo period cities were filled with these itinerant vendors who moved from one district to another, selling all sorts of specialized goods: combs, needles, small tools, even medicines. These traveling merchants were a vital part of the urban economy, connecting rural products with city neighborhoods and bringing the marketplace directly to people's doorsteps. The peddler kneels carefully on the floor and opens his case. Inside is an array of small metal tools. There are fine needles, perfect for delicate stitching, replacement heedle hooks for the looms, and tiny sharp scissors. The apprentices gather around with quiet interest. Even a silk workshop occasionally needs to replenish its tools. You pick up one of the scissors to examine it. The blades are narrow and precise, designed for trimming threads perfectly without causing any fraying. The craftsmanship is impressive, beautiful in its own understated way. Historians still argue about how much control the city authorities had over these vendors. Licensing systems did exist, but how strictly they were enforced likely varied from district to district, depending on the local demand and officials. Our guildmaster selects a handful of needles and pays the peddler a few coins. They exchange some pleasantries, comments on the weather, rumors about a festival in a nearby ward, and speculation about the upcoming mulberry harvests, which are crucial for silk production. The peddler shares a quirky tidbit. He mentions that in some neighborhoods, people believed that tool sellers like him carried small protective charms sewn into their sleeves to ward off pickpockets. In a city as large and bustling as Edo, a little bit of superstition could travel a long way. And it's a good reminder, you probably would unsurvive long here if you wandered around Edo flashing shiny coins without being cautious. With another polite bow, the peddler departs, the soft creak of his wooden case fading as he disappears down the lane. Inside, the looms resume their steady rhythm. The brief interruption felt refreshing, like a comma in the middle of a long sentence. Up in the loft, an apprentice is checking on the silkworms. A few have finally completed their cocoons. He carefully lifts one down to inspect it. The cocoon is surprisingly firm to the touch, its surface smooth and almost luminous. You hold it gently between your fingers. It feels impossibly light, yet you know that inside it holds a single continuous filament of silk that can stretch for astonishing lengths when it's carefully unraveled. Historians still debate the exact timeline for when Japanese silk production perfected its reeling techniques during the Edo period. It wasn't one single invention. Instead, improvements likely happened gradually, passed down from one artisan to the next through practice and word of mouth, rather than being announced in grand proclamations. The apprentice carefully places the cocoon back in its tray. It will be processed later. Everything here has its proper time and stage. The afternoon heat encourages slower speech and quieter movements. A few people flutter fans to create a small breeze. The apprentice, who was experimenting with humming earlier, continues his soft vibration experiment. But now, it's barely audible over the sound of the looms. Outside, a cart rattles past, its wheels bumping on the stone path. It's carrying stacked wooden barrels, and the faint, savory scent of soy sauce drifts into the workshop for a moment before fading away. You reach over and adjust the tension on your warp threads just slightly to ensure everything remains uniform. Silk is an unforgiving material. It doesn't tolerate uneven pressure. You probably wouldn't survive long here if you rushed your adjustments. This kind of precision demands absolute patience. The guildmaster walks over to inspect a completed section of fabric. He holds it up toward the angled afternoon light. In this particular glow, the woven pattern emerges more distinctly. Its subtle geometry catches the brightness for a moment before settling back into quiet restraint. He gives a single, satisfied nod. The day stretches onward. The shadows lengthen along the floorboards, and conversation dwindles back into a focused, productive silence. And as the shuttle slides back and forth beneath your steady hands, you can almost feel the city of Edo continuing its complex, layered dance just outside these walls. Vendors are still roaming the streets, temple bells are marking the time, and quiet cargo is floating down the canals. But here, within the workshop, silk is being created, thread by thread, as patient and enduring as the city itself. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the world of Edo craftsmanship, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories. See you next time. The afternoon light mellows, losing its sharp insistence and becoming something softer, more honeyed. Long shadows stretch across the tatami-like ink strokes from an oversized brush. The workshop hum persists, but there is a subtle awareness now that the day is leaning toward its final act. Your hands continue their practiced motion guide, press release. The pattern before you has grown into a substantial length of fabric, its understated geometry now fully legible in the angled glow. You probably won't survive long here if you expect applause at the end of each bolt. Edo craftsmanship concludes quietly. A faint breeze slips through the slightly opened window panel, stirring loose fibers and cooling perspiration at your temples. Outside, you hear children's voices again, louder than at midday. Lessons have ended somewhere nearby. The city shifts from commerce toward homecoming. Here's your mainstream historical fact. For this late afternoon hour, education in Edo extended beyond samurai academies. Terrakoya, or temple schools, provided basic literacy and arithmetic to townspeople children, contributing to surprisingly high literacy rates for the period. Merchants, artisans, even some laborers valued reading and writing. You imagine those children now, perhaps practicing characters that will one day record silk orders or compose poetry about autumn rivers. An apprentice sets aside his shuttle and stretches his fingers, flexing them carefully. Repetition leaves its imprint on joints as surely as patterns imprint on cloth. Historians still argue whether Edo's literacy rates rivaled parts of contemporary Europe or whether surviving records exaggerate their reach. Either way, the presence of printed materials ledgers, woodblock prints, instructional manuals suggests a city deeply engaged with text. The guildmaster calls for a brief inspection of the day's output. One by one, completed sections are lifted, examined under shifting light, and rolled carefully onto wooden beams. Imperfections are rare, but not ignored. A slightly uneven edge is trimmed with the newly purchased scissors. A quirky tidbit circulates as one artisan remarks that some weavers once believed speaking ill of a bolt while it was still on the loom invited flaws to appear. Compliment the silk, they'd say, and it behaves better. You glance at your own work and offer it silent encouragement. You probably won't survive long here if you criticize fabric within earshot of superstitious colleagues. The silkworm loft receives another visit. Several cocoons now hang complete, pale and oval. The apprentice begins gently transferring a small batch for the next stage reeling. Downstairs, a shallow basin of warm water is prepared. The cocoons will be softened carefully to locate the fine filament ends. Steam rises lightly, catching the last beams of afternoon sun. Historians still debate how standardized reeling techniques were across Edo workshops. Some argue that regional differences persisted, while others suggest increasing uniformity as demand grew. You watch as an artisan demonstrates the delicate process, brushing the surface of several cocoons to catch the nearly invisible threads, then combining them into a single strand for strength. The filament glistens faintly as it emerges. What was once a quiet chewing in a loft becomes luminous thread in a basin of warm water. Outside, the calls of vendors fade one by one. Shutters begin sliding closed along the lane. The workshop's energy shifts toward closure. Tools are wiped clean, shuttles aligned, threads secured to prevent tangling overnight. You complete your final pass for the day and secure the weft carefully. The loom falls silent beneath your hands. You probably won't survive long here if you leave tension unresolved, Silk remembers. The guildmaster records the day's totals in the ledger with steady brush strokes. Ink dries quickly in the warm air. A final inspection circle passes through the room. Quiet nods signal approval. No speeches, just acknowledgement. Sunlight dims further, retreating from the tatami until only lantern glow remains. One apprentice lights the evening lamp, its flame blooming gently behind paper walls. Outside, the canal reflects a streak of amber sky, fading toward indigo. And within the workshop, the long day of weaving, reeling, inspecting, and adjusting draws to a composed conclusion threads aligned. Cocoons softened. patterns grown quietly under patient hands. The lantern light steadies as twilight deepens outside, casting a mellow glow across the beams and looms. The day's labor has concluded, but the energy in the workshop has not vanished, has simply shifted from production to preparation. You help roll the finished bolt from your loom onto a smooth wooden beam, turning it carefully so the silk does not crease. The fabric catches the lantern light in soft waves, its pattern visible only when tilted just so. Subtlety remains its greatest strength. You probably won't survive long here if you expect fireworks at day's end. In Edo, achievement prefers understatement. The guildmaster oversees the stacking of completed bolts near the rear wall, each wrapped in protective paper and tied with narrow silk cords. Tomorrow, some will be dispatched toward merchants, others reserved for specific clients, perhaps even another samurai seeking restrained elegance. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this quiet interval. Edo's merchant class, though officially ranked below samurai in the social hierarchy, accumulated considerable wealth through trade and craft. Over time, merchants financed art, theater, and even lent money to struggling samurai families, subtly shifting economic influence. The irony hums quietly beneath the lantern globe, who weave and sell may not hold swords, but they hold coin. A knock at the door announces a familiar neighbor, a paper merchant, delivering fresh wrapping sheets. His timing aligns neatly with the end of production. The exchange is cordial, efficient, supplies flow in measured cycles. Historians still argue whether Edo's strict class hierarchy was as rigid in practice as it appeared in law. Economic realities often blurred distinctions, particularly in urban centers where merchants wielded significant leverage. The paper merchant mentions, almost casually, that a kabuki performance in a nearby district has drawn unusual crowds this week. Actors' costumes reportedly feature striking new fabric patterns. The apprentices perk up at this news. A quirky tidbit emerges as someone recalls that kabuki theater once faced restrictions for extravagance, with sumptuary laws attempting to curb overly lavish displays. Audiences and actors, however, proved remarkably creative at navigating such rules. You imagine silk, similar to what you wove today, shimmering beneath stage lights, admired by townspeople in crowded theaters. You probably won't survive long here if you underestimate Edo's appetite for styleben. When regulations try to contain it, the neighbor departs with a polite bow, leaving behind stacks of crisp paper sheets. You assist in trimming them to precise dimensions for wrapping tomorrow's output. Outside, the street quiets further. Lanterns flicker along the canal's edge, reflecting like small, steady stars in dark water. Upstairs, the silkworm trays rest. Those not yet cocooned continue their slow work, chewing softly into the night. The guildmaster closes the ledger with deliberate care. Inked figures represent hours of labor, mulberry leaves consumed, threads aligned. Historians still debate how extensively records like these were preserved across Edo's artisan districts. Some ledgers survived fires and relocations. Others vanished into smoke. Documentation, like silk, is fragile yet resilient. You sweep stray fibers from the tatami once more, gathering them into a small basket. Nothing wasted. Even fragments may serve some future purpose. An apprentice lights a second lantern as darkness thickens. Shadows stretch higher along the wooden walls, turning beams into silhouettes. Conversation returns briefly light remarks about the humming experiment, speculation about tomorrow's dye shipment, mild teasing about who folded their futon most neatly the night before. You stretch your arms overhead, feeling the day's repetition lingering in your shoulders. The body remembers labor and quiet aches. You probably won't survive long here if you expect ergonomic chairs and padded wrist supports. Edo offers totemian discipline. One by one, tools are placed back into their designated spaces. Scissors tucked carefully away. Shuttles aligned, the loom you worked at now stands still, threads secured for morning. Outside, the hyoshiji clappers echo faintly once more, marking the hour and reminding households to guard against fire. The workshop door slides closed, sealing out the cool night air. The lantern light grows more intimate, and as the final preparations for rest begin, again futons retrieved, tools quieted, silk safely wrapped. Silk safely wrapped, completing itself from dawn's mulberry leaves to dusk's folded bolts. The cycle has turned once more in Edo's measured rhythm. Futons reappear as if conjured from hidden compartments, unrolled across the tatami in familiar rows. The transformation from workshop to sleeping quarters feels smoother tonight, almost ceremonial. Tools rest neatly against the walls, looms stand patient and silent, and the lantern casts a deeper, honey-colored glow than it did the evening before. You kneel to smooth the corners of your bedding, pressing palms gently along the woven straw mat beneath. The faint grassy scent rises again, grounding and clean. You probably won't survive long here if you expect privacy screens and soundproof walls. Edo sleep is communal, layered with the soft breathing of others. One apprentice carefully checks the brazier before settling it safely for minimal warmth. Even at night, caution rules. Fire, ever the quiet threat, demands respect. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this restful hour. Edo was one of the largest cities in the world by the 18th century, with a population exceeding 1 million. Such density made communal living common, especially among artisans and laborers who shared space efficiently. The sheer scale of the city feels abstract from within these wooden walls. Yet, beyond them lie countless other rooms, just like this tools tucked away, futons unrolled, lanterns dimmed. Conversation drifts softly through the room as everyone settles. Someone mentions the kabuki performance the paper merchant described. Another wonders aloud whether silk woven here might someday adorn an actor portraying a famous hero. Historians still argue how much kabuki fashion influenced everyday dress versus simply reflecting it. Theater and street life fed each other in an ongoing loop of imitation and reinvention. A quirky tidbit surfaces when the youngest apprentice claims he once heard that certain kabuki actors secretly commissioned fabrics with hidden symbols stitched into the lining for good luck. Whether true or not, the idea delights him. You lie back, hands folded loosely over your stomach, watching the lantern flame tremble against paper walls. The workshop's beams create geometric shadows overhead, echoing the patterns woven earlier. Outside, the canal laps softly against its banks. A faint breeze slips through a narrow opening, cooling the warm air inside. You probably won't survive long here if you require total silence to sleep. Edo hums like a distant, steady ocean. The guildmaster speaks briefly from his futon near the rear wall, offering a calm reminder about tomorrow's dye shipment. Indigo must be prepared early. His voice carries authority even at whisper volume. Gradually, speech dissolves into stillness. One apprentice sighs deeply. Another adjusts his pillow-folded kimono pressed into service. Historians still debate how urban noise levels in Edo compared to other early modern cities. Some accounts describe lively streets late into the night. Others note surprisingly strict curfews. From here, you sense both activity muted by order. Your thoughts drift back through the day. The traveling tool peddler's careful display, the shimmering filament drawn from warm cocoons, the faint hum blending with loom rhythm. The silkworm loft above is quieter now. Most have entered cocooned stillness. Lantern light dims further as someone trims the wick slightly. The room slips into softer shadow, outlines blurring gently. You feel the day's work settling into your muscles, not painfully, but like a weight evenly distributed. The repetition of weaving has left a rhythm in your pulse. Outside, the Hyoshiji clappers sound faintly once more in the distance. Then silence stretches longer between city sounds. You probably won't survive long here if you cling to tomorrow's worries. Silk teaches patience thread by thread, day by day. The lantern flickers once, then steadies again. You watch it through half-closed eyes, its glow becoming less distinct, edges softening. The workshop breathes quietly around you with settling, distant footsteps fading, a shared exhale. And as sleep approaches once more, Edo wraps itself in layered hush like a bolt of silk carefully folded at day's end. Dawn returns again, subtle and patient, brushing the paper screens with pale silver before blooming into soft gold. You wake not to alarm bells, but to the quiet choreography of apprentices folding futons, sliding doors, and coaxing embers back to life. The workshop stretches awake like a Catan-hurried, precise you sit up, smoothing your sleeves, and inhale the faint scent of straw and cooling ash. Outside, a vendor's distant call announces fresh greens. Another day has slipped gently into place. You probably won't survive long here if you expect weekends. Edo commerce rests only when festivals demand it. The guildmaster wastes little time. Today's dye shipment, mentioned last night, has arrived. A wooden barrel rests near the entrance, bound with rope and marked with brush characters indicating indigo paste. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this morning. Indigo dye, known as azome, became extraordinarily popular in Edo, Japan, particularly among commoners. Its deep blue hues were practical, resistant to fading, and conveniently often permitted under sumptuary laws that restricted more flamboyant colors. The barrel lid is pried open carefully. Inside, thick, dark paste gleams faintly, almost black in the dim light. The scent is earthy, rich, slightly sharp. An apprentice begins preparing the dye vat, mixing the paste with water and natural fermentation agents in a large wooden tub. The surface looks unassuming at first muddy. Opaque but promises transformation. Historians still argue about the precise fermentation techniques used in various districts. Recipes were guarded carefully, passed down within families or guilds, sometimes adjusted subtly according to climate. You watch as the dye master, an older artisan with stained fingertips, visks the mixture with a small strip of silk. He dips it briefly, then withdraws it. At first, the fabric appears greenish. Only as air touches it does the color deepen into blue, oxidizing before your eyes. You probably won't survive long here if you lack patience for color to reveal itself. The apprentices murmur in appreciation. Indigo is both humble and mesmerizing. A quirky tidbit floats through conversation. Some Edo townspeople believed wearing indigo-dyed garments repelled insects due to compounds in the dye. Modern science suggests there may have been a grain of truth, though perhaps not to miraculous degrees. Bolts of undyed silk are prepared nearby, ready for immersion. The room shifts from weaving to dyeing, energy redirecting rather than diminishing. Outside, the canal glints in brightening sunlight. A small boat glides past, its occupant adjusting a straw hat against the rising day. You assist in lowering a length of silk carefully into the vat. The fabric disappears beneath the surface, absorbed into the dark mixture. Moments later, it is lifted, dripping and strangely green. Air works its quiet magic. Green deepens to blue. Historians still debate how indigo's dominance shaped Japanese visual identity during this era. From workwear to festival attire, shades of blue proliferated across classes. The guildmaster inspects the color with measured satisfaction. Not too pale, not too dark. The dyed silk is hung on wooden poles, too dry, droplets falling softly onto the floorboards below. Sunlight catches the wet fabric, turning it briefly luminous. You probably won't survive long here if you expect pristine sleeves by day's end. Indigo has a habit of marking the enthusiastic the apprentices move efficiently, repeating the dépendre process to achieve richer tones. Each immersion deepens the hue incrementally. A breeze from the canal drifts through the doorway, helping carry the faint fermentation scent away. The workshop smells alive, earthy, organic. Upstairs, silkworm trays remain quiet, their occupants largely cocooned now. Soon those threads will meet this very dye. As the morning advances, indigo transforms pale silk into deep, dignified blue. The workshop glows with shifting shades from navy to midnight, and once again, Edo's day unfolds through steady hands and careful mixtures, color blooming quietly beneath the rising sun. The indigo-dyed silk now hangs in gentle rows like a line of quiet banners, shifting from damp midnight to velvety blue as the morning air does its work. Sunlight pours through the open doorway, illuminating each length differently depending on how it catches the breeze. You stand beneath the suspended fabric, looking up as one edge flutters slightly. The color is deep, but not loud confident without boasting, a shade suited to merchants, artisans, and even certain ranks of samurai who favor restraint over spectacle. You probably won't survive long here if you spill indigo on your favorite sleeve. The stains linger like stubborn memories. The dye master tests dryness with careful fingertips, nodding when satisfied. The silk must rest fully before returning to the loom for final finishing. Patience is stitched into every stage. Here, as your mainstream historical fact for this phase. Edo period textile workshops often divided labor into specialized roles: banusta spinners, dyers, weavers. Finishers, though smaller establishments, required artisans to master multiple skills. Division of labor improved efficiency but preserved craft integrity. In this workshop, you sense that balance. Everyone understands more than one step, yet each respects the other's expertise. An apprentice carries a dried bolt to a finishing table, where small imperfections are addressed. Loose threads are clipped with the new scissors purchased yesterday. The sound tiny, crisp snips adds a delicate counterpoint to the workshop's deeper rhythms. Historians still argue whether increasing urban demand during the Edo period pushed workshops toward protein industrial organization or whether traditional handcraft methods remained dominant. Observing this room, you see efficiency, but not mechanization. Human pace governs every motion. A quirky tidbit surfaces as one artisan remarks that some customers once requested silk lightly scented with incense before delivery, whether for personal pleasure or to mask the faint aroma of dye. The practice occasionally added an extra layer of refinement. The guildmaster considers this thoughtfully, then sets aside a small incense pouch near the finished bolts perhaps for a special client. Outside, the street grows busier again. A messenger hurries past carrying folded documents sealed with twine. Somewhere nearby, a carpenter's hammer taps in steady intervals. You help roll a fully dried indigo bolt into a tight cylinder, wrapping it carefully in fresh paper delivered last evening. The paper feels crisp beneath your fingers, edges aligned precisely. You probably won't survive long here if you rush the wrapping. Presentation is the final stitch in the process. A knock at the door reveals a merchant's assistant arriving to inspect the newly dyed fabric. He bows respectfully and examines the bolt under shifting light, nodding with quiet approval. Payment will follow upon delivery. Historians still debate how often merchants directly influenced design choices in workshops versus simply purchasing what artisans produced. Likely, negotiation flowed both ways: market demand, guiding color and pattern subtly over time. The assistant departs with assurances of prompt collection. Tomorrow, the workshop resumes its steady cadence. Upstairs, the first batch of cocoons awaits reeling. Soon, their pale threads will be drawn and perhaps dyed in shades just like these. You pause briefly at the doorway, glancing toward the canal. Sunlight glitters off the water in bright flecks. A barge drifts slowly, its cargo indistinct. Inside, the indigo rows have nearly dried completely. The room feels both productive and calm, color fixed, threads aligned. The guildmaster closes the dye vat carefully, covering it to preserve fermentation for future use. Nothing wasted, nothing hurried. You flex your fingers, noticing faint blue smudges near your nails. Evidence of participation. And as the afternoon light begins once again to tilt westward, the workshop continues its patient cycle: cocoon to thread, thread to bolt, bolt to bundle each, stage flowing seamlessly into the next beneath Edo's steady sky. The afternoon light softens into a mellow amber, and the workshop shifts gears almost imperceptibly. The urgency of dyeing and finishing eases, replaced by a quieter ritual accounting. Silk may shimmer poetically, but someone must count the coins. You sit cross-legged near a low desk where the guildmaster unrolls a narrow ledger. The paper bears neat columns of brush-written characters, recording quantities of thread, bolts completed, dye used, and payments promised. Ink glides smoothly as he updates the day's work. You probably won't survive long here if numbers lull you too quickly. Even in a sleepy Edo workshop, mathematics has sharp little teeth. Here is your mainstream historical fact for this late afternoon scene. Edo, Japan had a highly monetized economy, with gold, silver, and copper coins circulating widely, and merchants keeping detailed records. The rise of chunin, the urban merchant class, made bookkeeping a respected skill. The guildmaster counts coppermon coins from a small cloth pouch, stacking them into tidy piles. The soft clink is oddly soothing, like rain tapping against wooden eaves. You help tally the expected payment from the merchant's assistant who visited earlier. Historians still argue whether merchant wealth in Edo rivaled or even subtly surpassed that of some lower-ranking samurai. Despite official class hierarchies placing merchants near the bottom, money, after all, has a way of bending social gravity. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind as the master mentions a neighboring shopkeeper rumored to hide surplus coins. Inside hollowed-out floorboards, whether true or simply urban gossip, it speaks to the quiet anxieties of prosperity. Outside, shadows stretch longer across the street. Vendors begin to pack their wares, folding cloths, stacking baskets. A fish seller's call fades into the distance, replaced by the faint jingle of a passing handcart. Back inside, the apprentices bring down fresh cocoons from upstairs. It is time to begin reeling tomorrow's thread. The transition feels seamless, finance giving way to fiber. You settle beside a shallow basin of warm water. The cocoons float gently, pale and fragile. Using slender sticks, you tease loose the filament's end, finding that nearly invisible strand. Once caught, it pulls free in a continuous shimmer. You probably won't survive long here if you lack delicate fingers. A careless tug can snap hours of patient labor. Several filaments are gathered together and guided onto a small reel, forming a stronger thread. The motion is repetitive, rhythmic. The wheel turns softly, accompanied by the faint hiss of silk sliding through water. Here, as another mainstream historical fact woven into the moment. Sericulture silk production had been practiced in Japan for centuries, introduced from China, but during the Edo period it expanded significantly, becoming a major domestic industry long before Japan's later export boom in the 19th century. Historians still debate how much technological exchange occurred between regions during this era of relative isolation under the Sakoku policy. While foreign trade was limited, internal innovation flourished. The cocoons slowly unraveled, each one yielding astonishing length from its small, quiet shell. You marvel, just briefly, at the mathematics of nature, how so much thread can hide inside something that once fit comfortably in your palm. A light joke drifts through your thoughts. If only your modern laundry could produce this much useful material from a single sock. The apprentices speak in hushed tones as they reel, careful not to tangle their strands. One yawns discreetly. The day has been long but steady. The guildmaster occasionally inspects the forming skeins, checking for consistency in thickness. Too thin, and it may break during weaving. Too thick, and the finished silk loses its supple grace. Upstairs, the now empty trays await tomorrow's cleaning. The life cycle continues. Outside, a temple bell tolls softly, marking the late hour. The sound carries over rooftops, mingling with the gentle turning of reels. You guide another filament onto the growing skein, watching it wind in even spirals. There is something hypnotic in the repetition. Draw, guide, repeat. You probably won't survive long here if you crave dramatic change. In this world, beauty emerges from patient loops and careful accounting. As the sky deepens toward evening blue, the same shade as today's Indigotha workshop glows in lamplight. Coins are counted, cocoons unraveled, ledgers updated, and through it all, you remain inside the steady pulse of Edo's silk trade, where even the quietest tasks hum with understated purpose. Evening settles gently over the canal, and the workshop transitions once more not into silence, but into something softer. Oil lamps are lit one by one, their flames small and steady, casting warm halos against wooden beams darkened by years of smoke. Shadows lengthen and blur. You sit back on your heels, stretching your fingers after hours of reeling silk. The skeins lie neatly coiled beside you, pale and luminous in the lamplight. Outside, the sky has deepened into indigo that rivals the divat from earlier nature, always showing off a little. You probably won't survive long here if you expect electric lighting and a late-night scroll through glowing screens. The brightest thing in your world right now is a flame no bigger than your thumb. The guildmaster closes the ledger with a soft thud and ties it carefully with cord. Accounts balanced, at least for today. He offers a quiet nod of approval to the apprentices. Work has been steady, mistakes minimal. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this tranquil hour. Edo, which would later become Tokyo, grew into one of the largest cities in the world by the 18th century, with a population exceeding 1 million. Its urban life pulsed even after sunset, though illumination remained limited to lanterns and oil lamps. From the doorway, you glimpse lanterns flickering along the street. Shopkeepers lower wooden shutters. A noodle vendor's cart rattles by, steam rising in fragrant curls. Somewhere, laughter drifts from a tea house. Historians still argue whether Edo's nightlife was more vibrant than that of contemporary European cities, given its dense population and flourishing entertainment districts. What is certain is that even in quiet artisan quarters like this one, the city never fully sleeps. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind as one apprentice carefully trims the wick of a lamp. Some households once believed that trimming a wick to short invited misfortune, as though stinginess with light might offend unseen spirits. Whether superstition or simply an excuse for brighter rooms, the result is a slightly more generous flame tonight. The reeling basins are emptied and wiped dry. Tools are arranged with almost ceremonial care. Wooden reels are stacked, scissors aligned. dye vat covered snugly. Order is a kind of gratitude for the day's labor. You rise and step outside briefly, drawn by the canal's quiet shimmer. The water reflects scattered lanterns, turning each ripple into liquid gold. A boat glides silently past, its occupant pulling gently, careful not to disturb the reflections too much. You probably won't survive long here if you're prone to tripping in dim light. Edo sidewalks are not forgiving, and wooden sandals are not known for stealth. Returning inside, you find the apprentices settling onto the tatami mats for a simple evening meal. Bowls of rice, a bit of pickled vegetable, perhaps a modest portion of fish, if fortunes allow. The aroma is humble but comforting. Here is another grounded fact woven into the moment. Rice functioned not only as a staple food, but also historically as a measure of wealth and taxation in Japan, particularly during earlier feudal periods. Even in Edo's monetized economy, its symbolic value endured. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth. Conversation remains gentle discussions of tomorrow's tasks, a brief joke about the merchant's overly serious assistant, speculation about upcoming festival preparations. Historians still debate how much leisure time artisans truly enjoyed during the Edo period. While workdays were long, festivals and communal events punctuated the calendar, offering bursts of color and sound. As bowls are emptied and stacked, someone hums a quiet tune. The melody is simple, repetitive, almost like the rhythm of reeling silk. The day's tasks echo in music. You stretch out on the tatami, listening to the faint creak of wood as the building settles. The oil lamps are lowered slightly, flames dimmed to conserve fuel. Shadows thicken, soft and embracing. Outside, a distant temple bell rings once more, slower now, as though even the bronze is growing drowsy. You probably won't survive long here if you fight the rhythm of this place. Edo's pulse is steady, unhurried, and it will carry you along whether you resist or not. The workshop, so alive with motion this morning, now breathes quietly. Silk rests, indigo dries, coins wait in their pouch, and you lie there, wrapped in the lingering scent of dye and rice and warm wood. Feeling the day fold itself neatly like a finished bolt of cloth. Morning does not rush you. It arrives like a careful hand sliding open a paper screen. Pale light filters in again, tracing soft rectangles across the tatami. For a moment, you hover between sleep and wakefulness, listening to the faint lap of canal water against its stone edge. The city is already stirring, but gently dough rarely explodes into noise. It accumulates it. You sit up, smoothing your hair and sleeves, and feel the familiar ache in your fingers from yesterday's reeling. Proof of effort. Proof of continuity. You probably won't survive long here if you measure progress by dramatic breakthroughs. In this world, success looks like consistency. The apprentices begin their morning routines, folding bedding, sweeping the floorboards, relighting the kitchen hearth. The guildmaster steps outside briefly, scanning the street as if reading its mood. A delivery cart creaks past, piled with lumber. A neighbor bows. The air smells faintly of damp wood and brewing tea. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this new day. During the Edo period, neighborhoods were organized into units called CH, and residents bore collective responsibility for order and fire prevention. Urban living required cooperation. A single spark could threaten entire blocks of wooden structures. You notice the water buckets stationed strategically near the entrance precautions against that ever-present fear. Fires were so common in Edo that they earned the nickname Flowers of Edo, blooming disastrously, yet frequently. It's a poetic label for something no one actually wants to see. Historians still argue whether the frequency of fires shaped Edo architecture more than aesthetic preference did. The widespread use of wood and paper made rebuilding easier, but also inevitable. Upstairs, fresh trays are prepared for a new generation of silkworm eggs. The life cycle does not pause for sentiment. You help spread mulberry leaves evenly, their green surfaces crisp and fragrant. Soon, tiny mouths will chew them into lace. A quirky tidbit surfaces as one apprentice mentions that some farmers once believed thunderstorms improved silk quality, as if the rumble of the sky lent strength to the threads. There is no firm evidence for meteorological magic, but it's comforting to imagine the clouds as silent partners in textile production. You carry yesterday's reeled skeins to the weaving area. The loom stands ready, warp threads aligned like a disciplined army awaiting orders. You guide the new silk into place, fingers working carefully to avoid tangles. You probably won't survive long here if you treat the loom like a rebellious instrument. It demands respect, not wrestling. The shuttle begins its measured journey back and forth. The faint thwack of wood against wood sets a familiar rhythm. Each pass binds yesterday's labor into something tangible. Outside, the canal traffic increases. Barges drift by carrying rice, timber, even barrels of soy sauce. Ito's arteries pump steadily. Somewhere downstream, those goods will find kitchens, workshops, and tea houses. Here, as another widely accepted fact, although Japan's Sakoku policy limited foreign trade during much of the Edo period, domestic commerce flourished extensively. Coastal shipping routes connected regions efficiently, supporting vibrant internal markets. Historians still debate the degree to which this relative isolation slowed or redirected technological development. Standing here at the loom, you sense innovation expressed not through steam engines, but through incremental refinement. The guildmaster pauses beside you, adjusting the tension slightly. Too tight, and the silk may snap. Too loose, and the pattern sags. Balance is everything, an unspoken philosophy woven into craft and life alike. You glance toward the indigo-dyed bolts, drying completely in the corner. Their color now seems even richer in the morning light. Soon they will depart for customers who may never imagine the quiet labor behind their garments. You probably won't survive long here if you crave recognition. Much of this beauty leaves anonymously. The shuttle continues its steady arc. The pattern emerging today is simple but elegant, subtle variations in thread thickness, creating texture more than overt design. Understated sophistication, very Edo. A breeze slips through the doorway, lifting the edge of a hanging cloth just enough to remind you that air too participates in the process. Nothing exists in isolation. Here, not thread, not coin, not community. By midday, the workshop hums again with synchronized motion. Silkworm eggs rest upstairs, warp and weft interlace below, and the canal glitters outside as though applauding softly. You settle into the rhythm without resistance. Yesterday's dye, last night's accounting, this morning's weaving, they all merge into one continuous current. And as you guide the shuttle once more across the loom, you sense how each ordinary day accumulates into something larger. An entire city dressed in quiet shades of blue, stitched from countless such mornings. The day stretches gently toward its close once more, but this time you feel it differently, not as a sequence of tasks waiting to be completed, but as a long, unbroken thread drawn from cocoon to skein, from skein to loom, from loom to bolt, and from bolt into the wide, humming life of Edo. The workshop moves in familiar patterns. The shuttle glides, the loom answers. Outside, a vendor laughs softly while bargaining over radishes. A child runs past, sandals slapping wood. Somewhere down the canal, a boatman hums a tune that rises and falls like breath. You probably won't survive long here if you expect grand finales. Edo does not end its days with fireworks. It exhales. Here, as your final mainstream historical fact woven quietly into the fabric of this moment. By the late Edo period, Japan's urban culture had produced a rich world of arts kabuki. Theater, ukiyo woodblock prints, haiku, poetry supported in no small part by the merchant economy that workshops like this sustained. Silk-dressed actors, merchants-funded prints, and artisans formed the backbone of it all. Historians still argue whether the peace enforced by the Tokugawa shogunate fostered this cultural flourishing more than political ambition ever could. Stability, it seems, leaves room for refinement. You pause from the loom and look around the workshop one more time. The dye vat rests, lid secure. Reels sit aligned in tidy stacks. Indigo bolts, now fully dry, wait patiently for delivery. Upstairs, silkworm eggs lie silent in their trays, futures curled invisibly within. A quirky thought drifts through your tired mind. Somewhere, perhaps, a fashionable townsman will boast about the deep blue of his new kimono without ever suspecting how many quiet mornings it required. If clothing could speak, it would probably sigh and request better posture. The guildmaster steps outside again, scanning the horizon as lanterns begin to glow along the street. The canal reflects each flicker, doubling the light in trembling patterns. No neon signs, no engines, just flame, water, and wood. You sit at the threshold, letting your legs dangle slightly over the step. The wood is cool beneath your palms. A breeze brushes your cheek, carrying the faint scent of soy, river water, and distant incense. You probably won't survive long here if you fight the pace of it all. But if you surrender to a tiff, you let repetition become comfort instead of boredom. Something shifts. The ordinary reveals its quiet dignity. Inside, the apprentices speak softly as they prepare to fold bedding once again. Their laughter is low and warm, like coals settling into ash. The guildmaster offers a final nod of satisfaction, not triumphant, just steady. The loom stands still now. Warp threads rest in parallel lines, waiting for tomorrow's shuttle. They remind you of the canal outside separate strands moving in shared direction. Historians still debate the daily emotions of people in eras like this. Were they restless, content, ambitious? We cannot hear their exact thoughts, but we can trace their patterns in surviving garments, in preserved ledgers, in the layout of streets that once carried their footsteps. You draw a slow breath. The oil lamps are lowered carefully, their flames shrinking but not vanishing. Shadows grow soft and wide, wrapping beams and tools in a gentle hush. Outside, a temple bell sounds once deep, resonant, patient. The canal water moves in small, almost invisible ripples. A final boat passes, its lantern, a solitary star, drifting across black glass. The air cools. You lie down on the tatami once more, feeling the woven straw beneath your shoulder. Your fingers, still faintly tinted with indigo, rest against your sleeve. There is no urgency here now, no shuttle crossing, no coin counting, just the steady echo of a city breathing in sleep. The workshop, the canal, the silkworm trays upstairs, they continue in cycles that do not depend on your constant awareness. Tomorrow, threads will be drawn again. Dye will bloom from green to blue. Coins will clink softly into careful stacks. But for now, everything loosens. The loom no longer demands tension. The warp threads slacken in your mind. The canal's shimmer fades into darkness. Lantern reflections blur and stretch until they resemble distant stars dissolving into night. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of silk once sliding through warm water. Inhale, draw the filament gently. Exhale, wind it onto the reel. There is nothing left to complete. Only the quiet workshop. Only the soft wooden beams. Only the canal carrying lantern light into deeper shadow. And you, resting at the center of it all, part of a pattern so steady and so unhurried that it asks nothing more from you tonight. Let the loom stand silent, let the dye settle. Let the city's faint hum become a distant whisper. You have followed the thread all the way through the day, and now it releases you gently, like silk slipping free from careful fingers. Sleep comes not as an ending, but as another quiet turning of the wheel.